The Omega Who Kept the World in His Hands. Chapter 1. The Jewel of House Valecrest. The Great Hall of House Valecrest was a masterpiece of old-world architecture. A cavernous space with vaulted ceilings supported by polished marble columns, carved with the crests of ancestors dating back nearly 8 centuries. Sunlight streamed through towering stained-glass windows, casting shifting patterns of sapphire, emerald, and gold across the polished stone floor, the heavy velvet draperies, and the sea of nobles gathered within. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax candles, imported spices, and the heavy, lingering fragrance of rare perfumes. Jasmine, sandalwood, and musk, mixed with the natural scents of the people themselves. The sharp, heavy musk of alphas, the steady, earthy aroma of betas, and the soft, sweet floral notes of omegas. It was the season of the Grand Assembly, the time of year when the major noble houses of the realm gathered to renew alliances, settle disputes, and display their wealth and power. For House Valecrest, this year's assembly carried a weight that every person in the hall could feel, though few spoke of it openly. There were whispers, soft and insidious, drifting through conversations like smoke. Valecrest is fading. Their minds are running dry. Their trade routes are failing. They cannot hold their position much longer. Standing near one of the great pillars, partially sheltered by the curve of the stone, was Elowen Valecrest. To look at him was to understand exactly why he was known across the realm as the Jewel of Valecrest. He was 22 years old, possessing a beauty so rare and refined that poets had written verses about it, and artists had begged for the privilege of painting him. His hair was the color of spun silver, thick and soft, falling in gentle waves past his shoulders, catching the light so that he seemed almost to glow from within. His face was delicate, with high cheekbones, a slender, straight nose, and lips shaped like rose petals, usually curved in a soft, demure smile. But it was his eyes that held people captive, large, almond-shaped, and the color of storm-gray seas, clear and deep, appearing soft and dreamy to the casual observer, yet holding a depth that few ever bothered to look for. His frame was slender, as was typical for Omegas, wrapped in a tunic of fine blue silk embroidered with silver thread, the fabric light and flowing, designed to emphasize grace and fragility. Around his neck rested a thin silver chain holding a single sapphire, the Valecrest family stone. His hands were folded loosely before him, his posture relaxed and modest, exactly as an Omega of high birth was expected to carry himself. To everyone in that hall, Elowen was simple to define. He was the quiet, beautiful, delicate son of Duke Alaric Valecrest. He was the one who never spoke out of turn, never argued, never demanded anything. He was the one who spent his days in the gardens, or in the library, or tending to small, harmless hobbies. He was the treasure of the house, something to be admired, protected, and eventually traded in marriage to secure a powerful alliance. They saw only what he allowed them to see. What they did not see, what no one saw, save for a handful of trusted individuals who had sworn oaths of silence under penalty of death, was that behind those storm-gray eyes lay the sharpest, most comprehensive intellect the realm had ever known. Elowen did not just possess intelligence. He possessed a mind that functioned like a vast, perfectly organized library combined with a master strategist's war room. He had total recall of everything he had ever read, heard, or seen. He could process complex mathematical equations in seconds, map out political trends years in advance, and understand the motivations of people better than they understood themselves. And over the last 10 years, from the age of 12 onward, he had used that mind to build an empire that existed entirely in the shadows, hidden beneath the very noses of the noble society that believed him to be nothing more than a pretty decoration. Elowen's gaze moved slowly across the room, his expression one of idle, polite observation, but his mind was working at high speed, cataloging, analyzing, and storing every single detail. He noted the way Lord Harrowby leaned heavily on his carved oak cane, his knuckles white with the effort of standing. Harrowby was only 40 years old, yet his movements were stiff, his skin sallow, his breathing shallow. His physicians claimed it was age or fatigue, but Elowen knew better. He had recognized the symptoms years ago: slow-acting mineral poisoning, likely from the water source on Harrowby lands. The lord would be dead within the year, and his house, already weakened by debt and poor management, would collapse, their lands and titles ripe for acquisition. Elowen had already calculated the most profitable way to absorb their remaining trade networks before anyone else even realized the house was dying. He watched Lady Thuron, laughing too loudly at a joke told by the envoy from the southern provinces. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Her fingers were twisted tightly around the stem of her wine goblet, her nails pressing white against the glass. She was nervous. Elowen knew why. 3 months prior, Lady Thuron had attempted to renegotiate the cotton trade agreement, demanding lower tariffs while secretly hoarding stock to drive up market prices. She thought she had been subtle. She thought no one had noticed the discrepancies in her shipping manifests. But Elowen had seen it immediately, had tracked every shipment, every ledger entry, every bribe paid to minor customs officials. He held the evidence, locked away in his memory and in secure vaults scattered across the city, and he knew exactly when and how to use that information to force more favorable terms for Valecrest and for his own enterprises. His gaze shifted to his father, Duke Alaric, standing at the head of the hall receiving guests. Alaric was a man of imposing stature, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, his hair graying at the temples, his bearing that of a traditional ruler who valued history, honor, and the old ways above all else. He was a good man, Elowen knew, fair, honest, and deeply proud of his lineage. But he was also stubborn, rigid, and dangerously out of touch with how the world was changing around him. He believed that noble status and ancient rights were enough to sustain a house. He did not understand that power was fluid, that money was the lifeblood of influence, and that the old structures were rotting from within. It was a failure that would have destroyed House Valecrest years ago, had Elowen not stepped in, unseen and unacknowledged, to hold it all together. Father thinks we are surviving on tradition and luck, Elowen thought, his smile never wavering as he watched his father greet another lord. He does not know that every coin in the treasury, every sack of grain in the storehouses, every shipment that reaches our ports safely, is there because I planned it, paid for it, and protected it. The origin of his secret empire had been innocent enough, born of boredom and a naturally curious mind. At 12 years old, Elowen had been confined to the estate after a bout of seasonal fever, forbidden from strenuous activity or social events. Left alone in the extensive gardens of the Valecrest estate, he had begun experimenting with the flowers and herbs growing there, blending oils and extracts just to see what scents he could create. He had quickly realized that the perfumes and cosmetics favored by noble ladies, and increasingly, noble men, were imported from overseas at exorbitant costs, marked up dozens of times over by greedy merchants and middlemen. The quality was inconsistent, the formulas outdated, and the supply chain fragile, easily disrupted by storms, wars, or political disputes. Elowen had known he could do better. Working in secret, assisted only by the head gardener and the household steward, 2 servants who had served the Valecrest family for decades, and who had quickly realized that the quiet young Omega was a genius unlike any they had ever met, Elowen refined his blends. He improved extraction methods, making the scent stronger and longer-lasting. He added subtle properties, oils that calmed the nerves, extracts that improved skin health, ingredients that repelled insects. By the time he was 13, he had created products superior to anything available from abroad. The next step had been distribution. He could not sell them under the Valecrest name. An Omega heir engaging in trade was unheard of, scandalous, strictly forbidden by tradition and law. It would have ruined his reputation and embarrassed his house. So, Elowen created layers of separation. He established a series of independent trading companies, registered under names of trusted associates, managed by proxies, owned by complex webs of shell companies and anonymous trusts that only he could untangle. By 14, the Valecrest perfumery, though no one knew it bore the family name, was the most profitable luxury goods business in the realm. But Elowen did not stop there. His mind worked in patterns, seeing connections between things that others viewed as separate. If he could master the production and sale of cosmetics, he reasoned, he could master anything. At 15, he turned his attention to medicine. He studied ancient texts, consulted with healers, experimented with herbal remedies, and realized that most standard treatments were ineffective, outdated, or outright dangerous. He developed safe, potent medicines, tonics for strength, salves for wounds, remedies for fevers and stomach ailments. He established a network of apothecaries, again under anonymous ownership, ensuring that high-quality care was available across the land, while generating immense wealth and, more importantly, immense goodwill and dependency. People got sick everywhere, in every house, in every village. To control the supply of medicine was to hold a form of power that no army could match. By 16, he had expanded into food production and preservation. He invented methods of pickling, drying, and sealing food that allowed it to be stored for years or transported across vast distances without spoiling. He sold these techniques to merchants and farmers, ensuring that even in years of bad harvest or harsh winter, supplies remained steady and prices remained fair. This made him a silent hero to the common people and a vital asset to every lord who relied on stable food supplies to keep their lands peaceful. At 17, he moved into law and finance. He realized that disputes over contracts, land boundaries, debts, and inheritance were the things that destroyed noble houses more often than war or disease. He established a quiet consulting firm staffed by the best legal minds money could buy, advising clients on how to navigate the complex, treacherous waters of noble law. His advice was always neutral, always correct, and always effective. Noble houses fought wars over contracts. Elowen wrote the contracts that prevented wars, or ensured that if they happened, his clients won. By the age of 22, standing quietly in the great hall of his father's castle, Elowen Valecrest controlled a network that spanned cosmetics, medicine, food production, legal services, banking, and real estate. His companies owned warehouses in every major city, fleets of trading ships, vast tracts of land bought quietly through intermediaries, and even publishing houses that subtly shaped public opinion and cultural trends. He did not just have money. He had infrastructure. He had information. He had influence that reached into every corner of society, from the poorest peasant village to the royal court itself. And nobody knew it was him. They looked at him and saw a soft, beautiful, reserved Omega who liked flowers and books. They did not realize that the Jewel of Valecrest was actually the most powerful single individual in the entire realm. Elowen, my dear, you are standing all alone again. The soft, familiar voice broke through his analysis. Elowen turned, his expression shifting instantly from sharp calculation to warm, gentle affection. His mother, Duchess Serafina, approached him, her silk gown rustling softly, her own scent of rose and vanilla wrapping around him comfortingly. She was a woman of kindness and grace, possessing a quiet intelligence of her own, though she had long ago learned that her role was to support her husband and manage the household. Elowen bowed his head respectfully, a soft smile touching his lips. I am never truly alone here, mother. I am simply observing. There is much to see. Serafina smiled, reaching out to brush a stray lock of silver hair back from his forehead, her touch light and loving. You always do observe so much. Sometimes, I think you see things no one else notices. Her gaze drifted out over the crowd, her expression dimming slightly with concern. But you should mingle a little more, my love. People talk. You know how they are. They say you are too quiet, too shy, too delicate for the rough world of politics. She sighed softly. And lately, the talk has been growing louder. About Valecrest. About our fortunes. Elowen's smile did not falter, though his gray eyes sharpened just for a fraction of a second. He knew exactly what talk she meant. Despite his best efforts to stabilize the house, the decline of the official Valecrest holdings was becoming impossible to hide. Duke Alaric refused to change his ways. He refused to sell off unprofitable lands. He refused to modernize the mining techniques or renegotiate ancient trade pacts that were now heavily in favor of other houses. He lived as though Valecrest was still the dominant power it had been a century ago, spending lavishly on feasts, festivals, and displays of wealth that the house could no longer afford, officially. Elowen covered the deficits. He transferred funds from his private companies into the Valecrest treasury through complex, untraceable loans and investments, ensuring that his father never even realized the money was coming from within. But he could not stop the rumors. People saw the outdated ships, the falling output from the mines, the lands that were no longer as productive as they once were. They judged the house on what they could see, not the invisible foundation Elowen had built beneath it. "Talk is just talk, Mother," Elowen said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. "House Valecrest has stood for centuries. It has survived wars, plagues, and kings who wished us harm. It will survive whispers and gossip as well. I hope you are right." Serafina looked toward the head of the hall, where Duke Alaric was currently engaged in a serious conversation with his chief advisors, their heads close together, expressions grave. Her hand tightened slightly on Elowen's arm. "But your father, he has been meeting with envoys almost every day for the last month. Important ones. From the great houses. Ashbourne, Thuron, Harrowby." She paused, swallowing hard, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, heavy with sadness. "There have been proposals, Elowen. Marriage proposals." Elowen nodded slowly, his expression remaining serene, though inside, his mind instantly accessed the files he had compiled on every single house that had made inquiries. He knew this was coming. He had known it would come for years. It was the inevitable outcome of the political situation. When a great house appeared to be weakening, alliances were offered not out of kindness, but out of desire to absorb the remaining strength of the failing house. He had intercepted the letters. He had analyzed every offer. He knew exactly what each house wanted: the prestige of marrying into one of the oldest lineages, access to Valecrest's remaining lands and resources, and, he suspected, more and more lately, access to him. Word had spread, quiet and underground, that Elowen Valecrest was not merely a pretty face. Merchants and lords who had benefited from his anonymous advice, or who had seen the results of his work, had begun to wonder. How does Valecrest maintain such quality in their goods? How do they always seem to know where to invest? Why does that quiet Omega sun seem to be everywhere, yet nowhere at all? Rumors had grown that Elowen possessed a golden touch, or a great wisdom, or secret knowledge. He was becoming a prize not just for his lineage, but for his potential value as a partner. "I expected as much," Elowen said gently, reaching out to cover his mother's hand with his own. "With the state of things, an alliance is the logical next step. Father would be remiss if he did not consider it." Serafina's eyes filled with tears, which she quickly blinked away, looking at him with heartbreaking tenderness. "I know you never wanted this. I know that you are so much more than a bargaining chip. You are so clever, Elowen. So capable. You could have been anything. You could have run the house better than any alpha ever could, if only the laws allowed it." Her voice trembled. "But as an Omega tradition dictates that your duty is to marry, to bind our house to another, to secure our future." I only hope they choose well for you. That you are not sent to some harsh estate, or married to a brute who will not understand you, or appreciate what you are." Elowen squeezed her hand, his mind already turning over the plans he had laid out for this exact moment. "Do not worry, mother, truly. I know what is coming. And I know exactly how to handle it." He did not tell her that he would be the one making the final choice. Not his father, not the advisors, not tradition. He had spent 10 years building his power precisely so that when this moment arrived, he would not be a pawn to be traded away. He would be the one holding the board, moving the pieces exactly where he needed them to go. He had already narrowed the list of suitors down to one. The conversation was interrupted by the loud, clear voice of the herald, standing near the main entrance, cutting through the hum of conversation in the hall. Announcing the arrival of Lord Elowen Ashbourne, and his son, Magnus Ashbourne, heir to House Ashbourne. A hush fell instantly over the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Even the musicians in the gallery above stopped playing. House Ashbourne. The name carried weight, power, and history. They were the strongest, richest, and most influential house in the realm. Their lands spanned vast territories in the northern highlands, mountains rich in iron, silver, and coal, forests that stretched for hundreds of miles, providing the finest timber in the known world, rivers that powered mills and transported goods, and ports that controlled the major trade routes connecting the north to the south and the wider world. They controlled the supply of weapons, the building materials for ships and castles, and the flow of commerce. They had the ear of the king, the loyalty of the army, and the fear of every other noble house. If Valecrest was fading, Ashbourne was the rock against which all others leaned. And now they had come here. To Valecrest. Elowen felt the shift in the atmosphere like a physical weight. Every gaze in the room was fixed on the entrance, curiosity, envy, and calculation written on every face. He straightened slightly, his posture remaining soft and unassuming, but his focus sharpened to a razor's edge. This was the moment he had been anticipating for months. The final piece of the puzzle was walking through those doors. First came Lord Elowen Ashbourne. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered even in his older years, his hair a distinguished silver gray, his face lined with the marks of a lifetime spent ruling, negotiating, and winning. He wore robes of deep forest green, trimmed with gold thread, the Ashbourne crest, a raven with a sword in its talons, emblazoned boldly across his chest. His scent preceded him, pine earth and the sharp, biting tang of ice. It was the scent of the north, of wild lands and unyielding strength. He moved with the easy, confident stride of a man who had never known what it was like to be refused anything he desired. But it was the man who stepped in behind him and slightly to his left that drew every eye and held Elowen's gaze completely. Magnus Ashbourne, the heir. The man spoken of in whispers that were equal parts reverence and fear. They said he had commanded his first battalion at 16. They said he had restructured the entire Ashbourne trade network at 18, doubling their profits in a single year. They said he never smiled, never wasted a word, never lost a negotiation. They said he was the perfect alpha, disciplined, brilliant, ruthless, and boundlessly powerful. Elowen looked at him and felt the strange, quiet hum of recognition deep in his bones. Magnus was tall, towering over nearly every man in the hall, his frame broad and heavily muscled beneath a tunic of charcoal gray wool, cut simply but expensively, designed for movement and authority rather than decoration. His hair was black as midnight, cropped short and neat, revealing a strong, angular face with high cheekbones, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and lips that were set in a firm, uncompromising line. But it was his eyes that captured Elowen's full attention, dark, dark onyx, sharp and unreadable, moving slowly across the room, assessing everything and everyone with cold, precise calculation. His scent hit Elowen next, rolling over him in a heavy wave, pine forests deep in winter, cold steel, snow, and something underlying it, something primal and dangerous, hunger. It was a scent so potent, so distinctly alpha, that several Omegas standing nearby gasped softly or swayed on their feet, instinctively reacting to the sheer dominance radiating from him. Even the alphas in the room, many of them powerful lords in their own right, unconsciously straightened their spines or stepped back slightly, giving him space. Magnus Ashbourne did not just enter a room, he occupied it. Elowen did not sway. He did not lower his eyes. He did not feel fear, or the instinctive submission that tradition dictated an Omega should feel in the presence of such a powerful alpha. Instead, he felt that familiar, thrilling spark of intellectual challenge. He watched Magnus move, noting the economy of his movements. No wasted energy, every step measured, every gesture controlled. He saw the way Magnus stood half a pace behind his father, a position of respect, yet his posture was that of a man already in command, already the true power standing beside the figurehead. Disciplined, Elowen catalogued instantly. Trained from birth. Strategic. Keeps his true thoughts locked away. Sees everything. Misses nothing. Magnus's gaze swept past the crowd of lesser nobles, past the fawning greeters, past the display of wealth and finery, and then, suddenly stopped. His eyes locked onto Elowen. For a heartbeat, the rest of the great hall seemed to vanish. The noise of conversation faded into a dull hum. The shifting light from the stained glass windows seemed to still. It felt as though Magnus had reached across the distance between them and physically taken hold of Elowen, so intense was that dark, searching gaze. Elowen held it. He tilted his chin up just a fraction, a movement so small no one else would notice, and looked back at Magnus with the same quiet, thorough examination he applied to everything else. He saw the moment Magnus realized what he was looking at. He saw the flicker of surprise, so brief anyone else would have missed it, at finding an Omega who did not look away. Then he saw the shift, interest, sharp and calculating, followed immediately by recognition. Magnus knew who he was. More than that, Magnus knew what he was. He's been studying me too, Elowen realized, a quiet satisfaction rising in his chest. He hasn't just come here for an alliance between houses. He's come here for me. Duke Elowen Valecrest, Lord Kaelin's voice boomed out, warm and commanding, cutting through the silence. He moved forward, arms open, to greet Elowen's father. It is a pleasure to finally stand within these ancient walls. Your hospitality is legendary. Duke Elowen stepped forward, his expression a mix of pride and nervousness, bowing low to his powerful guests. Lord Kaelin. Lord Magnus. The honor is entirely ours. We did not dare hope you would grace us with your presence personally. But matters of such importance require personal attention, do they not? Lord Kaelin replied, clapping Alaric on the shoulder with enough force to make the older man stagger slightly. He turned, gesturing to his son. And my Magnus, he insisted on coming. He has heard much about House Valecrest, and about certain members of your family. His eyes drifted deliberately toward Elowen, who was still standing near the pillar, his hands folded demurely before him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew exactly who Lord Kaelin was referring to. The Jewel of Valecrest. Duke Alaric turned, searching the crowd until his eyes found Elowen. He beckoned with one hand, his expression proud but tense. Elowen. Come forward, my son. Meet our guests. Elowen moved, gliding through the crowd with that effortless, graceful motion that people always commented on. Heads turned as he passed. He heard the whispers rise up around him. There he is, look at him, more beautiful than any painting, lucky Ashbourne, they've come for him. Surely, he ignored them all, keeping his expression soft and pleasant, his steps measured and light. He stopped before Lord Kaelin and Magnus, bowing his head slightly, a perfect, respectful obeisance. "Lord Kalen." "Lord Magnus," he said, his voice clear, melodic, and perfectly calm. "Welcome to House Valecrest. May your stay be pleasant and profitable." Lord Kalen smiled, a wide, predatory thing, looking Elowen over as one might look over a thoroughbred horse or a rare gemstone. "Truly. They do not exaggerate. You are as lovely and as well-spoken as the tales say." He turned to Alaric. "You have a great treasure here, my friend. A treasure that many have coveted, I am certain." Alaric nodded, chest swelling with pride. "Elowen is the pride of our house. Gentle, learned, pious, everything an Omega of high standing should be." "Indeed." Lord Kalen turned back to Elowen, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to carry only to those closest. "But I suspect, Lord Elowen, that you are far more than just a pretty face and good manners. I suspect that your father's description, while accurate, is incomplete." Elowen lifted his eyes then, meeting Lord Kalen's gaze directly, and offered a small, mysterious smile. "We are all more than we appear, my lord. It is the nature of living in the public eye. One learns to show only what is safe to share." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Magnus shift slightly, his attention fixed entirely on Elowen now. The Alpha had not spoken a single word since entering. He had not taken his eyes off Elowen since their gazes first met. "Wise words," Lord Kalen chuckled, straightening up. "Very wise. I can see why you are valued so highly. Come, Alaric. We have much to discuss. Matters of trade, matters of state, and matters of the future." He glanced pointedly between Elowen and Magnus. "Matters that require privacy and attention." Alaric nodded quickly. "Of course. My private chambers are prepared. Elowen, you will accompany us. It is time you began to understand the weight of duty that rests upon this house." It was a signal. The entire hall understood. The Ashbournes had not traveled days across the harsh northern lands just to exchange pleasantries. They had come to make a deal. And everyone knew exactly what that deal would involve. As the small group moved toward the private wing of the castle, leaving the buzzing, whispering crowd behind, Elowen fell into step behind his father and Lord Kalen. Magnus fell back as well, matching his stride to Elowen's, walking beside him rather than with the elders. They walked in silence down the long, stone-flagged corridors, lined with suits of armor and tapestries depicting Valecrest history. The heavy doors and thick walls swallowed the noise of the great hall, leaving them in quiet seclusion. "You study everything," Magnus said suddenly. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was deep, resonant, and low, vibrating through the air between them, rich with that northern accent, sharp, clear, unhurried. Elowen turned his head slightly to look at him, keeping his expression politely curious. "Pardon, my lord. When you entered the hall, when you stood by the pillar, when you walked across the room." Magnus did not look at him. He looked straight ahead, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid and perfect. "You did not look at people the way an Omega looks at them. You did not look with admiration, or shyness, or vanity. You looked analytically, like a man assessing assets and weaknesses." Elowen felt a thrill of pure exhilaration shoot through him. "Yes. This is exactly who I thought you were." "I observe," Elowen corrected softly, his tone mild. "It is a harmless habit. One gets bored, standing still for so long. Watching people is more entertaining than guessing the patterns in the stone floor." Magnus turned his head then, looking down at him, and Elowen was struck again by the sheer intensity of those dark eyes. There was no romance in that gaze. No infatuation. There was only cold, sharp intelligence and the undeniable spark of ambition. Do not play the fool with me, Elowen, Magnus said quietly, his voice level and calm, yet carrying an undercurrent of absolute certainty. I have spent the last 3 years investigating every major house in this realm. I know the numbers. I know the trade volumes. I know the profit margins. And I know that by all rights, House Valecrest should be bankrupt, ruined, gone. He leaned slightly closer, his scent wrapping around Elowen, heavy and intoxicating, blocking out all other smells. And yet Valecrest stands. Valecrest goods are still the highest quality on the market. Valecrest lands remain fertile. Valecrest influence, while quiet, remains strong. And every single anomaly, every single discrepancy, every single piece of information that does not add up, leads back to you. Elowen felt the game shift. He had expected them to suspect. He had expected them to be curious. But he had not expected Magnus to be this precise, this thorough, this close to the truth. He did not panic. He did not deny it. Instead, he simply looked back at Magnus, his gray eyes clear and steady, and let a very small, very knowing smile touch his lips. Then you are a better investigator than most, Lord Magnus, Elowen replied, his voice soft but unwavering. Most people only see what they want to see. A jewel in a display case. A decoration. A quiet son who likes books and flowers. Magnus's lips twitched, the very first sign of emotion Elowen had seen from him. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a smile of triumph. Of confirmation. I never look at what people want me to see, Magnus said, straightening up again as they reached the heavy oak doors of Duke Alaric's private study. He reached past Elowen to open the door, holding it wide, his dark eyes locking onto Elowen's one last time before they entered. I look for what they try to hide. And I always find it. Elowen stepped past him, into the dim, wood-smoke-scented room, his mind racing faster than ever. He knows. Or he suspects enough to believe I am worth everything. This was better than he had planned. This was perfect. As the doors closed behind them, sealing them inside with the two heads of the houses, Elowen took his place in the chair indicated for him, hands folded neatly in his lap, his demeanor once again that of the quiet, demure, obedient Omega son. But behind those storm-gray eyes, his mind was already mapping out the next 10 years. He was calculating exactly what Magnus Ashbourne wanted, exactly what Lord Kalin intended, and exactly how he would use both of them to expand his empire further, higher, and deeper than ever before. He looked across the table at Magnus, who was already watching him, his expression unreadable but his attention fixed completely on Elowen. You think you have come to claim a prize, Elowen thought, his heart beating with the excitement of the game, of the strategy, of the power that hummed between them. You think you are coming here to take control of Valecrest, and to use my mind as a tool for your own rise. He tilted his head slightly, his polite, gentle smile never faltering. But you are wrong, Magnus Ashbourne. You have not come to claim me. You have come to be my partner. You have come to be the sword I wield, the shield I hide behind, the face I present to the world while I work the levers of power from the shadows. Duke Alaric cleared his throat, signaling the start of the most important negotiation in Valecrest history. Lord Kalin leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Elowen sat back, calm, composed, and utterly in control. The meeting had just begun. The proposal was about to be laid out. And Elowen Valecrest, the Omega who held the world in his hands, was already 5 moves ahead of everyone in the room. He was ready.
Chapter 2. The Ashbourne proposal. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing the 4 of them inside Duke Alaric Valecrest's private chambers, cutting off the hum of conversation and the music drifting from the great hall. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, from the performative elegance of the assembly to the sharp, heavy gravity of high politics. This was no longer a social gathering. It was a negotiation that would determine the future of two great houses and potentially the balance of power across the entire realm. The room itself was a reflection of House Valecrest's history and character. The walls were paneled in dark, polished oak, carved with intricate scrollwork and the Valecrest crest, an oak tree with roots reaching deep into the earth, repeated at intervals. Shelves lined every available space, filled with leather-bound books, ancient manuscripts, and ledgers dating back centuries. Maps of the realm, drawn on thick parchment and colored with natural pigments, hung framed on the walls, marking out borders, trade routes, and resource deposits. The air smelled of old paper, beeswax polish, and the rich, earthy scent of the tobacco Duke Alaric favored, which lingered in the fabric of the heavy velvet draperies and the thick rugs covering the stone floor. A fire crackled softly in the large stone hearth, casting warm, dancing light over the room and chasing away the chill that always seemed to cling to the stone walls of the castle. At the center of the room stood a massive table, hewn from a single slab of oak, scarred and worn smooth by centuries of use. Duke Alaric took his place at the head of it, his posture straight and proud, though the lines of worry around his eyes and the tightness of his jaw betrayed his anxiety. To his right sat Lord Elowen Ashbourne, looking entirely at ease, leaning back in his high-backed chair with one arm draped casually over the armrest, his expression confident and shrewd, like a man who already knew he would leave this room with exactly what he had come for. Standing behind Lord Elowen's chair, slightly to the side and perfectly still, was Magnus Ashbourne. He had not sat down. He stood with his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his weight evenly distributed, his posture disciplined and alert. It was a deliberate choice, Elowen knew well. In the unspoken language of noble politics, to stand while others sat was a display of dominance, of superiority, of the fact that you were not bound by the same rules of courtesy or ease. It signaled that you were the power behind the power, the force that did not need to take a seat to command respect. It was a move designed to unsettle, to remind everyone present exactly who held the upper hand in this discussion. Elowen sat in the chair indicated for him, near the foot of the table, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his back straight but relaxed, his expression soft, attentive, and demure, exactly how an Omega son was expected to behave during discussions of state and alliance. He looked like nothing more than a decorative element in the room, a prize to be discussed and exchanged. But behind his storm-gray eyes, his mind was working at a speed and depth that no one else in the room could have comprehended. He had already catalogued every detail of Lord Elowen's demeanor, the way his fingers tapped rhythmically on the armrest, betraying impatience beneath his calm smile, the slight narrowing of his eyes whenever he looked at Duke Alaric, a look of assessment that bordered on pity, the confident tilt of his head, born of decades of always getting exactly what he wanted. He had catalogued Magnus as well. The way Magnus did not look at the fire, or the maps, or the books. The way Magnus did not look at Duke Alaric, or even at his own father. Magnus's eyes were fixed steadily, unblinkingly on him. It was a gaze heavy with weight, with calculation, with an intensity that should have made Elowen shiver or look away. But Elowen did not react. He simply met that gaze occasionally, when it was polite to do so, and in those brief moments, he sent back his own silent message. I see you. I know exactly what you are doing. And I am ready for it. Let us be frank with one another, Alaric, Lord Elowen began, his voice smooth, deep, and authoritative, cutting through the quiet crackle of the fire. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his expression shifting from polite friendliness to sharp, serious business. There is no need for flowery words or false courtesy between men of our standing. You know why we are here. You know the state of your house. And you know exactly what we have come to offer. Duke Alaric shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. He was a proud man, and he did not enjoy having his family's situation laid bare so bluntly, especially not in front of his son. But he was also a realist, and he knew he could not afford to take offense. The state of Valecrest is strong enough, Kaelin. We have weathered harder times than these. Rumors of our decline are greatly exaggerated, spread by those who envy our history and our standing. Lord Kaelin smiled, a thin, knowing smile that did not reach his eyes. Rumors are rarely born from nothing, my friend. And let us not pretend we do not both know the truth. Your silver mines in the Western Hills are producing less than half of what they did 20 years ago. Your trade fleets are aging, slow, and vulnerable, and you have not invested in new shipbuilding in a decade. Your lands are fertile, yes, but your methods are outdated, your yields are dropping, and your debts to the merchant guilds are mounting. He paused, letting every word sink into the heavy silence of the room, his gaze steady on Alaric's face. House Valecrest has stood for centuries, I grant you that. It is a name respected across the realm. But names and history do not feed people. They do not arm soldiers. They do not keep the crown from looking at your lands and thinking, perhaps these resources would be better managed by someone else. Without a strong alliance, without new blood, new capital, and new influence, Valecrest will not fade. It will be consumed. Piece by piece. Alaric's face had reddened, a mix of anger and embarrassment, but he did not interrupt. He knew, as well as Kaelin did, that every word spoken was true. It was the secret fear he carried every day, the weight he tried so hard to hide. Elowen sat quietly, his face serene, his expression sympathetic. He listened to the list of his father's failures and the house's problems, and inside his mind, he ran the numbers. Debts paid off. Ships secretly funded and repaired through shell companies. New agricultural techniques introduced quietly to tenant farmers. Mines supplemented by new extraction methods father does not understand. Everything Lord Kaelin listed as evidence of decline was something Elowen had already stabilized, or was in the process of fixing, using the vast wealth generated by his hidden empire. But he let Kaelin speak. He let his father feel the pressure. Because pressure was exactly what was needed to make the decision Elowen wanted. And we are in a position to offer you exactly what you need, Lord Kaelin continued, his voice softening slightly, becoming persuasive, almost kind. House Ashbourne is strong. We control the northern trade routes that connect to the eastern kingdoms. We own the finest shipyards in the realm. Our iron mines produce more metal than all other houses combined. We have the ear of the king, the loyalty of the military, and enough wealth to buy the loyalty of anyone else we might need. He gestured broadly, as if encompassing the entire world outside the walls of the castle. An alliance with us will restore your fortunes overnight. We will fund the modernization of your mines and your fleets. We will open our trade networks to you, ensuring your goods reach markets you have not accessed in generations. We will guarantee your lands against encroachment. We will secure your family's place at the very heart of power for generations to come. Valecrest will not just survive. It will thrive under the protection and partnership of Ashbourne. Duke Alaric let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders sagging slightly as the weight lifted from them. He looked at Kaelin with hope shining in his eyes. And in exchange, what does Ashbourne want for such generosity? Lands, titles, trade rights. Lord Kaelin smiled again, and this time his eyes turned toward Elowen. The weight of his gaze settled heavily upon him, assessing, appreciative, hungry. In exchange, Kaelin said slowly, clearly, we ask for marriage. Between your son, Elowen, and my son, Magnus. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate, echoing in the quiet room. Alaric blinked, clearly surprised. Elowen. He glanced at his son, then back at Kaelin, frowning slightly in confusion. Elowen is a great prize, Kaelin. He is beautiful, he is gentle, he is learned. Everything an Omega of noble birth should be. But you know as well as I do, politically speaking, he brings no new lands. He brings no military strength. He brings no special title. You could have chosen any Omega in the realm. The heirs of Thuron, of Harrowby, of the southern marches, all of them bring vast lands, great wealth, armies. Why Elowen? It was the question Elowen had been waiting for. The question he knew was coming. And it was the moment that would define everything. Lord Kalin leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers under his chin, his eyes still fixed on Elowen, studying him as one studies a rare and valuable artifact. Because, Kalin said, his voice dropping lower, becoming serious and intense, Elowen Valecrest is not just beautiful and gentle. He is special. We have been watching your house for a long time, Alaric. Years, in fact. We have been watching how things work here. How problems seem to solve themselves. How shortages never seem to affect Valecrest lands, even when the rest of the region goes hungry. How your goods remain superior in quality and reliability, even as your official ledgers show shrinking budgets. How merchants and minor lords, even powerful ones, seek out your quiet son at gatherings, or send letters addressed to him, or speak of him with a respect that is usually reserved for ruling alphas. He paused, letting the implications settle over the room like a fine mist. We have heard things. Quiet things. Things people dare not say aloud. That Elowen has a mind unlike any other. That he understands numbers better than any accountant. That he understands trade better than any merchant prince. That he understands people, their motivations, their weaknesses, their needs, better than any diplomat or spy master. We have traced contracts, Alaric. We have traced shipments. We have traced advice given and decisions made. And every single thread eventually leads back to him. Alaric looked from Kalin to Elowen, his face a mask of utter bewilderment and shock. He looked at his quiet, gentle son, the boy he thought spent his days reading poetry and tending flowers, and he saw him now through new, terrifying eyes. Elowen. What is he talking about? Elowen kept his expression perfectly calm, perfectly modest, his hands folded quietly in his lap. He looked at his father with soft, reassuring eyes. I am merely observant, father. I notice things. I remember things. That is all. Lord Kalin flatters me. Does he? Magnus spoke for the first time since entering the room. His voice cut through the tension like a blade, deep, resonant, and utterly certain. He stepped forward, moving out from behind his father's chair, coming to stand at the end of the table, closer to Elowen. He loomed there, tall and broad, his presence filling the space, his scent, pine, snow, steel, rolling over Elowen in waves, heavy and intoxicating. Magnus looked down at Elowen, his dark eyes searching, probing, seeing far too much. I have read the analyses, Magnus said, his voice low and steady, addressing Elowen directly, ignoring everyone else in the room. The anonymous trade reports sent to the Merchant Guild 5 years ago, predicting the collapse of the Western grain market and advising on how to profit from it. The legal briefs submitted to the Crown Council regarding property rights in border territories, written with a precision and foresight that no lawyer in the realm possesses. The formulas for preserving food, for refining oils, for improving weaving techniques, things that revolutionized industries, all appearing suddenly, all without an author, all originating from Valecrest lands. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze never wavering. I recognize the logic, Elowen. I recognize the patterns of thought. The way you approach a problem, breaking it down to its smallest parts, understanding every variable, calculating every possible outcome before making a single move. It is exactly how I think. Only yours is sharper, broader, faster. Magnus leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer, his intensity increasing. I did not request you because you are beautiful. I did not request you because you are the son of a duke whose house is failing. I requested you because I realized something that no one else in this realm has realized yet. You are the true power of Valecrest. You are the reason this house still stands. You understand how the world works better than any ruler, any general, any merchant or king alive today. He straightened up again, his expression shifting from intense scrutiny to absolute certainty. And I am not a man who wants a decoration. I am a man who wants to rule, to build an empire that will last 1,000 years. And I realized long ago that true power is not held by the man who holds the sword or sits on the throne or owns the land. True power is held by the man who understands. He gestured toward Elowen, as if presenting a treasure of infinite worth. And you, Elowen Valecrest, you understand everything. The room was silent. Duke Alaric sat stunned, his mouth slightly open, looking at his son as if seeing him for the very first time. Lord Kalin watched with a satisfied, knowing smile. He had known his son was right, of course, but seeing it confirmed so clearly was even better than he had hoped. Elowen felt a surge of something powerful rising in his chest. Pride, yes, but also relief, and a strange, exhilarating excitement. He had spent his whole life hiding his brilliance, downplaying his abilities, letting people see only what was safe. No one had ever looked at him and seen him. No one had ever looked at his mind and valued it above his beauty, above his lineage, above everything else. Magnus Ashbourne had not just guessed his secret. He had sought him out specifically because of it. Alaric finally found his voice, shaking his head slightly as if waking from a dream. You truly believe Elowen is capable of all this? That he is some kind of hidden mastermind? Lord Kalin laughed softly, leaning forward again. Alaric, look at him. Look past the silk and the manners and the pretty face. Look at his eyes. Does that look like the eyes of a boy who only reads poetry and tends flowers? Alaric looked at Elowen again, really looked this time, and slowly recognition began to dawn. He remembered now how Elowen had always known exactly what gift to give a difficult guest. How Elowen had always known exactly which advisor to trust and which to ignore. How Elowen had always seemed to have money available when the treasury was empty, explaining it away as small savings or investments from old family funds. How he had always solved problems before Alaric even knew they existed. My son, Alaric whispered, awe and confusion warring in his expression. You have been protecting us all this time. Elowen offered a soft, gentle smile, reaching out to touch his father's hand briefly. I have only ever done what was my duty, father. To serve my house. To ensure its safety and its glory. Then he turned his gaze, slow and deliberate, to Magnus. He met those dark, intense eyes directly, and this time he did not hide. He let Magnus see it all, the sharpness, the brilliance, the absolute certainty that lay beneath the soft exterior. And if Lord Magnus is correct, if I possess this understanding he speaks of, then tell me, Lord Magnus. Elowen's voice was soft, clear, and steady, ringing in the quiet room. Does that change your proposal? Do you still want to marry someone who might be your equal? Someone who might know more than you? Someone who might, perhaps, have plans of his own? The question hung in the air, dangerous and charged. Lord Kalin's eyebrows lifted, surprised by the boldness of it. An Omega questioning an alpha heir like this was unheard of. Duke Alaric looked nervous, ready to apologize or intervene. But Magnus only smiled. It was a real smile this time, sharp, dangerous, hungry, and utterly delighted. It transformed his face, making him look less like a cold statue and more like the predator he truly was, having finally spotted prey worthy of his claws. It changes nothing, Magnus said immediately, his voice low and intense, filled with a dark kind of satisfaction. If anything, it makes it far more interesting. It makes it necessary. He took a step closer to the table, his hands gripping the edge of the heavy oak, leaning forward toward Elowen. I did not want a wife I could rule over. I did not want a husband I could control. I have no interest in obedience. I have no interest in silence or submission. His eyes burned into Elowen's. I want a partner. I want a mind that can keep up with mine. I want someone who understands power the way I do. Someone who knows that to rule the world, you must first understand every single piece of it. Magnus paused, his gaze never wavering. I want you, Elowen Valecrest. Not despite your secrets, not despite your power, not despite the fact that you are likely plotting something even now, but because of it. I want the only person in this realm capable of standing beside me, looking out over everything we have built, and understanding exactly what it took to get there. Elowen felt his heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the thrill of the game, of the perfect alignment he had been planning for years. He had come into this room intending to accept the proposal, yes, but only on his own terms, only because Magnus was the only one strong enough, clever enough, and powerful enough to serve as the perfect shield and sword for his own empire. But hearing Magnus speak like this, hearing that Magnus didn't just accept his hidden power, but actively sought it, craved it, respected it, changed everything. It turned a calculated alliance into something far more potent, far more dangerous, and far more exciting. Then we understand each other perfectly, Elowen said softly, his voice clear and calm, never breaking eye contact. This marriage is not about love. It is not about romance, or tradition, or even just duty. It is about control, about legacy, about survival, and about building something greater than either of us could ever build alone. Lord Kalin clapped his hands together once, a sharp, satisfied sound that broke the heavy tension in the room. Excellent. That is exactly the way it should be. Straight to the point. No foolish sentimentality. Just ambition. The foundation of every great dynasty. He turned to Duke Alaric, who was still looking between his son and Magnus with a mix of bewilderment, pride, and dawning realization. You see, Alaric, you possess a treasure far greater than you ever knew. And we are offering you the greatest possible future for your house and for your son. Together, Ashbourne and Valecrest will not just be powerful. We will be untouchable. Alaric nodded slowly, finally seeming to find his footing again. He looked at Elowen, really looked at him, and for the first time he didn't see the quiet, delicate son he had always protected. He saw the brilliant, powerful architect who had been holding everything together from the shadows. He saw the man his son truly was. And then he looked at Magnus, and he saw a man who was strong enough to handle that power, who was smart enough to respect it, and who was ambitious enough to help it grow. Then it is agreed, Alaric said, his voice steady and firm, regaining the dignity of his station. The marriage will take place. Elowen will join House Ashbourne as Magnus's husband. The alliance is sealed. Wonderful, Lord Kalin beamed. We will have the legal teams draw up the formal contracts immediately. The wedding ceremony itself will be held in 3 months' time, here at Valecrest, to honor your history, and then we will travel back to the Ashbourne estate in the north, where Elowen will take his place as co-heir and partner. He stood up, signaling that the formal part of the discussion was concluded. Now, there are details of dowries, lands, and titles to be worked out, but I will leave that to the lawyers. I believe my son and your son have much more to discuss. He gestured to the door, and Alaric, catching the hint, stood as well, bowing slightly. Of course. I will accompany you to the reception chambers. We shall leave them to speak. As the heavy oak door closed behind the 2 older men, the silence in the room returned, But it was no longer heavy with tension or negotiation. It was charged, sharp, electric, and intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with power and understanding. Elowen remained seated in his chair, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his posture composed, though inside, his mind was already racing through thousands of possibilities, mapping out every conversation, every demand, every move he would make from this moment forward. Magnus stood where he had been, near the head of the table, watching him, his expression unreadable but his focus absolute. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply observed each other, like two generals surveying the battlefield before the first move was made, or two master chess players sitting across from each other at the board, already seeing the game 10, 20, 30 moves ahead. Magnus was the first to break the silence. He moved slowly, walking around the perimeter of the table, his steps measured and heavy, until he stood directly in front of Elowen, towering over him. He was so close that Elowen had to tilt his head back just to look up into his face. The scent of him, pine, snow, cold steel, and that underlying primal hunger, filled every breath, surrounding Elowen, wrapping around him like a heavy cloak. Most Omegas, even strong-willed ones, would have felt overwhelmed, submissive, perhaps even frightened by the sheer weight of alpha dominance radiating from Magnus. But Elowen only felt seen. Challenged, alive. "You accepted very quickly," Magnus said, his voice low and deep, rumbling in his chest, a statement rather than a question. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, and brushed the back of his fingers along Elowen's jawline. His touch was cool, firm, and undeniably possessive, but it was not cruel, not rough, not the claim of a conqueror taking spoil. It was the touch of a man inspecting a rare, powerful artifact he had spent years searching for, ensuring it was real, ensuring it was truly his. Elowen did not flinch. He did not pull away. He leaned slightly into the touch, just a fraction, a calculated move to show confidence, to show that he was not afraid, that he knew exactly what this was. "My duty is to my house," Elowen replied softly, his voice steady and calm, meeting Magnus's dark eyes without wavering. When an alliance offers such great benefit, hesitation would be foolish. Magnus's eyes narrowed slightly, searching for the lie, searching for the truth beneath the polite answer. "Is that truly all it is, duty? You do not strike me as a man who acts merely because tradition dictates it. You strike me as a man who acts only when you see the advantage in it." He withdrew his hand slowly, letting it fall to his side, but he did not step back. He remained close, invading Elowen's personal space deliberately, testing boundaries, measuring how much Elowen would allow. "You knew we were coming," Magnus stated. "Long before we sent the formal notice. Long before we even left Ashbourne lands. You prepared for this meeting. You prepared for me." It was not a guess. It was a fact. Elowen offered a small, mysterious smile, the kind that never reached his eyes but gave away just enough to keep Magnus hooked, keep him interested, keep him wanting to unravel every secret Elowen held. "I prepare for everything, Lord Magnus. It is what I do. I analyze possibilities. I weigh risks and rewards. I plan for every eventuality." "And what did you plan for this?" Magnus asked, leaning down further, bringing his face inches from Elowen's, his breath warm against Elowen's skin. "Did you plan to accept me? Or did you plan to use me?" Elowen tilted his head slightly, his expression calm and unapologetic. "Does it matter? You plan to use me as well. You said it yourself. You want my mind. You want my understanding. You want the things I can give you that no one else can." He paused, letting his words sink in, his gray eyes clear and sharp. "We are using each other, Magnus. That is the nature of this agreement. You bring the strength, the military power, the public influence, the wealth of your house. I bring the knowledge, the strategy, the unseen networks, the understanding of how everything truly works. Together, we become something that neither of us could ever be alone. That is the deal. That is why you came. That is why I said yes. Magnus let out a low, dark chuckle, a sound of pure satisfaction. He straightened up, standing tall again, looking down at Elowen with an expression that was half admiration, half obsession. You speak so plainly. So honestly. It is refreshing. Everyone else in this realm hides behind titles and courtesy and flowery words. Everyone else tries to pretend they are doing things for honor or duty or love. He reached out again, this time taking Elowen's hand in his own, his fingers wrapping firmly but gently around Elowen's slender wrist, lifting it up between them. He turned Elowen's hand over, studying the palm, the fingers, the delicate bones, as if seeing not just a hand, but the instrument that had built an empire in the dark. But you admit it. You admit you are here for power, for advantage, for ambition. Magnus looked up from Elowen's hand, locking eyes with him again. I knew you would be perfect for me. I knew from the moment I realized who was writing those reports, who was solving those problems, who was pulling the strings while everyone else looked the other way. I knew then that I had to have you. He brought Elowen's hand to his lips, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to the center of his palm, his eyes never leaving Elowen's face. It was a gesture that was equal parts reverence and possession, equal parts respect and claim. I did not just request a marriage, Elowen. I did not just ask for an alliance. I hunted you. I spent years gathering information, proving my theories, ensuring that what I suspected was true. I maneuvered every political piece on the board to ensure that this was the only possible outcome. I made sure that no other house could offer you what I can. I made sure that your father would have no choice but to agree. I made sure that you would end up right here, right where I want you. Elowen felt a jolt of surprise, not fear, but genuine shock. He had thought he was the master planner, the one who saw everything, the one who had positioned Magnus as the perfect pawn and partner. But Magnus was telling him now that he had been the one planning, he had been the one maneuvering, he had been the one chasing Elowen all along. You went to that much trouble, for me? Elowen asked, his voice soft but steady, hiding his surprise behind curiosity. Magnus released his hand, but did not let go completely, his fingers still loosely tangled with Elowen's. For us. For what we can build. For the world we will rule. His expression hardened, became serious, intense, possessive. I am not a man who shares, Elowen. I am not a man who lets go of what I claim. You may be brilliant. You may be powerful. You may have built an empire that rivals kings, but understand this clearly. From the moment that contract is signed, you are mine. He leaned in again, his voice dropping to a low, rumbling growl that vibrated right through Elowen's chest, heavy with alpha command and absolute certainty. Your mind is mine. Your knowledge is mine. Your secrets are mine. Everything you have built, everything you know, everything you are, it belongs to me now. You will not hide things from me. You will not work against me. You will not keep parts of yourself back. I want it all. And I will take it all. Elowen did not flinch. He did not look away. He looked straight into Magnus's eyes, right into the heart of that fierce, possessive ambition, and he smiled. A sharp, knowing, confident smile that matched Magnus's own. You think you are taking possession of me, Elowen said softly, his voice calm and unyielding, his fingers tightening slightly around Magnus's hand in return, claiming him right back. You think you are claiming my empire, my mind, my power as your prize. He stood up then, rising from the chair until he was standing close enough that their chests almost touched. He was small next to Magnus, slender and delicate, but the power radiating from him was undeniable, equal in force and weight to the Alpha's own. But understand this clearly, Magnus Ashbourne, I do not belong to anyone. Least of all you. You did not hunt me down and catch me like some wild animal. You walked right into my plan. You came to me because you knew I was the only one capable of lifting you higher than you could ever go alone. You want my power. You want my mind. You want the things I can give you. Elowen reached up, placing his hand flat against Magnus's chest, right over his heart, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath the wool tunic. Then you belong to me, just as much as I belong to you. You are my sword, Magnus. You are my shield. You are the strength I need to make my world work. And if you think for one moment that you will be the master, and I will be the obedient servant, you have vastly misunderstood exactly who you have agreed to marry. The air between them crackled. It was a challenge, thrown down clearly and deliberately. It was the moment where the balance of power was defined. Any other Omega would have been crushed for speaking to an Alpha heir like that. Any other Alpha would have punished such boldness instantly. But Magnus did not punish him. Magnus threw his head back and laughed, a deep, rich, genuine sound that filled the room, loud and powerful. It was a laugh of pure delight, of triumph, of having found exactly what he had been looking for. "Good," Magnus said, his voice rough with emotion, his eyes burning with admiration and desire and something deeper, darker, far more dangerous. "That is exactly what I wanted to hear. That is exactly why I chose you." He reached out, wrapping both arms around Elowen's waist, pulling him flush against his body, holding him tight, secure, possessive. Elowen did not resist. He rested his hands on Magnus's shoulders, looking up at him, calm and composed, perfectly at ease in the embrace of the most powerful Alpha in the realm. "I did not want a husband who would bow his head and say yes, my lord, to everything I say," Magnus murmured, his face leaning close again, his lips brushing against Elowen's ear, sending shivers down Elowen's spine. "I wanted someone who would fight me, someone who would challenge me, someone who is strong enough to stand beside me, or even against me, if need be. Someone who is my equal in every single way." He pulled back slightly, looking deep into Elowen's gray eyes, his expression fierce and tender and utterly obsessed. "We will rule this realm, Elowen. We will change everything. We will take everything we want, and we will hold it tight. You will handle the unseen world, the money, the information, the strategy, the things no one else sees or understands. I will handle the seen world, the armies, the courts, the laws, the power everyone else fears and respects. Together, nothing will be able to stop us." Elowen smiled, genuine and bright, a smile that finally reached his eyes, lighting them up with the full force of his brilliant mind and his boundless ambition. "That sounds like a perfect arrangement." 3 months, Magnus said, his voice dropping low again, serious and intense. 3 months until the wedding. Until you come north with me. Until you become my husband and my partner. His hands tightened on Elowen's waist, holding him closer, claiming him completely. "Use that time well, Elowen. Secure your affairs. Prepare your people. Protect your secrets. Because once you cross the threshold of Ashbourne Hall, there is no going back. You will be bound to me. Irrevocably, forever." 3 months is more than enough time to prepare everything, Elowen replied confidently. He pulled back slightly, stepping out of Magnus's embrace, smoothing his tunic with calm, precise movements, regaining his composed demeanor, though the spark in his eyes remained bright and sharp. "And do not worry, my lord. I always come fully prepared." He walked past Magnus, moving toward the heavy oak doors, but paused with his hand on the iron handle, looking back over his shoulder. Magnus stood where he had been left, watching him, his expression hungry and possessive and utterly captivated. "And Magnus?" Elowen asked softly, Yes. Elowen's smile turned sharp, mysterious, and utterly victorious. You said you hunted me for years. You said you maneuvered everything to make this happen. You said I walked right into your plan. He tilted his head slightly, his gray eyes glinting with quiet triumph. But did it never occur to you that I might have let you catch me? With that parting shot, Elowen opened the door and stepped out into the corridor, leaving Magnus alone in the quiet room, staring at the empty space where he had stood, realizing suddenly, with a jolt of excitement that nearly took his breath away, that perhaps, just perhaps, he hadn't been the hunter at all. Elowen walked down the stone corridor, his steps light and graceful, his heart beating fast with exhilaration. He passed servants and guards who bowed respectfully, seeing only the quiet, delicate jewel of Valecrest. They did not see the mastermind who had just struck the most important deal of his life. They did not see the man who had just claimed the most powerful alpha in the realm as his partner and tool. He reached his own private chambers and stepped inside, locking the heavy door behind him, leaning back against it for a moment, closing his eyes and breathing deeply, letting the scent of pine and cold steel that still clung to his clothes wash over him. Magnus Ashbourne was everything he had hoped for: powerful, intelligent, ambitious. And, most importantly, he saw me. He didn't fear Elowen's mind. He didn't want to control it or suppress it. He wanted it. He valued it above everything else. He wanted to merge his own strength with Elowen's intellect to create something unstoppable. Elowen pushed himself away from the door and walked to the large oak desk in the center of the room. He sat down, pulled a sheet of parchment toward him, dipped his quill in ink, and began to write. He didn't write love letters. He didn't write vows or promises. He wrote lists, contracts, conditions, terms. Magnus expected obedience. Magnus expected that once the papers were signed, Elowen would belong entirely to him, bound by law and tradition to serve and obey. But Elowen Valecrest did not sign anything without reading every word, understanding every clause, and adding a few dozen of his own. He began to draft the terms that would be included in the marriage contract. Terms no Omega in history had ever dared to demand. Terms that would ensure his autonomy, his ownership of his own assets, his right to conduct his own business, his equal status in decision-making, his legal protection, and his full access to Ashbourne resources and influence. He set down the quill at last, the parchment covered in precise, unyielding demands that would redefine every rule of noble marriage, turning a standard alliance into a binding pact between equals. Every stroke of ink was a quiet declaration that he would never be owned, only partnered, and that Magnus would soon learn that true power lay not in possession, but in trust. With a satisfied glint in his storm-gray eyes, he folded the paper carefully, knowing this was only the beginning of a union that would eventually bend the entire realm to their will. Chapter 3. The first contract of marriage 3 months passed in a blur of preparations, negotiations, and the quiet, relentless work of consolidation that defined Elowen Valecrest's life. While the rest of the noble world busied itself with the spectacle of the upcoming wedding, ordering fine garments, composing congratulatory verses, and speculating wildly about the union between the realm's most beautiful Omega and its most formidable Alpha, Elowen spent his days and nights in the private chambers of the Valecrest estate, surrounded by stacks of parchment, ledgers, maps, and correspondence. To his family and the household staff, it appeared as though he was simply attending to the sentimental and administrative details of leaving his childhood home, cataloging personal belongings, writing notes of gratitude to longtime servants, and overseeing the packing of his books and favorite possessions. They saw the quiet, composed young man who moved gracefully from room to room, his expression serene, his manner gentle, and they sighed over the impending loss of the house's jewel, unaware that every crate marked personal effects contained not just books or clothing, but encoded records, asset deeds, and secure instructions for the continuation of his hidden empire. In truth, Elowen was doing what he did best, securing his position, protecting his interests, and laying the groundwork for what came next. He transferred ownership of several key businesses to proxy holders he had trusted since he was a boy, ensuring that no legal marriage contract, no matter how carefully written or negotiated, could ever fully strip him of his independence or his resources. He updated codes, changed access protocols, and reinforced the layers of anonymity that shielded his enterprises from prying eyes, including those of his future husband. He also spent hours drafting, revising, and perfecting the document that would serve as the legal and spiritual foundation of his new life, the marriage contract itself. Traditionally, noble marriage contracts were straightforward, formulaic documents. They outlined the exchange of dowries and titles, the terms of inheritance, the duties of each party, and the rights of the husband, almost exclusively the husband, over his spouse, their household, and their joint property. For an Omega, such a contract was essentially a deed of transfer, moving them from the legal guardianship of their birth family into the legal possession of their alpha spouse. There was no room for negotiation, no consideration of personal autonomy, no acknowledgement that the Omega might possess wealth, influence, or intellect worthy of protection or recognition. Elowen intended to rewrite every single one of those unwritten rules. He sat now at the heavy oak desk in his study, the final draft of his contract spread out before him, illuminated by the soft glow of oil lamps. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and unyielding, every clause phrased with the kind of legal precision that only someone who understood law better than the lawyers themselves could achieve. He had spent weeks crafting it, anticipating objections, closing loopholes, and turning the very traditions that were meant to bind him into tools that would instead secure his freedom and his power. When the appointed day arrived for the formal reading and signing of the contract, the atmosphere in Duke Alaric's private chambers was thick with anticipation and quiet tension. Present were Duke Alaric and Duchess Seraphina, Lord Magnus Ashbourne and his advisors, the realm's most senior legal scribe, a man of advanced years and rigid adherence to precedent, and, of course, Elowen and Magnus. Magnus stood as he always did, tall, still, commanding, near the head of the table, his dark eyes fixed on Elowen from the moment he entered the room. Since their private conversation 3 months prior, their interactions had been formal and rare, limited to brief, polite exchanges during planning meetings or public gatherings. Yet between them, a current of awareness hummed constantly. Magnus had not forgotten Elowen's parting words, that perhaps he had been the one allowed to be caught, and his curiosity had only deepened, transforming into a keen, focused interest that bordered on fascination. He had expected Elowen to be clever, yes. He had expected him to be sharp, to be aware of his own value. But he had not expected the extent of what he would soon discover. "Before we proceed to the standard articles of agreement," Elowen said softly, stepping forward to place his own parchment alongside the official documents laid out by the scribe, "I have taken the liberty of drafting additional clauses. Matters that pertain specifically to my circumstances and to the nature of this union." The scribe frowned, adjusting his spectacles, clearly taken aback. "Additional clauses, Lord Elowen. That is highly irregular. The terms of alliance and marriage are set by the heads of houses. Omegas do not. Lord Elowen is a member of this house, and he brings unique value to this alliance," Magnus interrupted, his voice deep and calm, cutting through the scribe's protest instantly. He did not look at the scribe, he looked only at Elowen. "Let us hear what he has written." Duke Alaric nodded, though he looked nervous. Lord Kalin smiled, intrigued rather than concerned. "By all means. I am always interested to see what my new son-in-law has to say." Elowen began to read, his voice clear, steady, and unhurried, each word landing with the weight of absolute certainty. He started with the basics, but redefine them entirely. He demanded, and wrote into law, that he would retain full and sole ownership of all assets, lands, businesses, and holdings currently in his name or under his control, including those unknown to anyone but himself. No part of his fortune, his work, or his influence would ever become the property of Ashbourne, nor would Magnus have any legal right to seize, manage, or interfere with them unless explicitly invited to do so. He secured the right to travel freely, to conduct business within or outside Ashbourne territory, to receive guests, to communicate privately, and to make decisions regarding his own affairs without needing Magnus's permission or oversight. He wrote clauses regarding inheritance that shocked every legal mind in the room. Any children born of this union would inherit equally from both parents, with rights to both houses, but they would also inherit Elowen's independent legacy, bound by his rules, not Ashbourne's. He stipulated that he would have a seat on all Ashbourne governing councils, equal voice in political and financial decisions, and full access to all Ashbourne records, archives, and trade networks, access that even many high-ranking members of the House were denied. He included articles regarding respect and treatment. He would never be confined, guarded against his will, or treated as a subordinate. He was a husband, a partner, and an equal, and that status must be recognized publicly and privately. By the time he finished reading, the room was silent. The scribe looked as though he might faint or have apoplexy. Duke Alaric stared at his son with a mixture of pride and awe, finally understanding the full measure of the man he had raised. Lord Callan leaned back in his chair, laughing softly in disbelief and admiration. But it was Magnus's reaction that mattered most. Magnus walked slowly around the table until he stood directly in front of Elowen. He reached out and took the parchment from Elowen's hands, reading it over again himself, line by line, his expression unreadable. For a long time, no one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. "You demand autonomy," Magnus said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "You demand equality. You demand access to everything I have, while keeping everything you have entirely your own." He lifted his eyes, locking gazes with Elowen, and there was no anger in them, no offense. There was only that sharp, hungry appreciation that had been there from the start, now amplified tenfold. "You have essentially written a contract that makes you my partner, not my possession. That turns a marriage of alliance into a merger of two independent powers." Elowen did not look away. "That is exactly what this is, Magnus. Or did you think I would hand over my mind, my work, and my life simply because I said I do? You said you wanted my intellect, my understanding, my power. But power that is owned is diminished. Power that is free is limitless." He paused, letting his words settle before continuing, his tone shifting from firm negotiation to something quieter, more personal. "Besides, what do you have to fear? If I am truly as valuable as you believe me to be, then giving me freedom is the only way to ensure I can be of use to you. Restrain me, control me, own me, and you get a clever advisor, perhaps. But let me work as I know how to work, and you get an empire." Magnus stared at him, searching for any sign of deception, any sign of weakness, any crack in that calm, perfect armor. He found none. Instead, he found something he had never encountered in anyone else, a mind that matched his own, a will that was as strong, a vision that was broader. Then slowly, a smile touched his lips, a real smile, warm and dark and utterly captivated. He turned to the scribe and handed the parchment back. "Make it official," Magnus said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Every clause, every word. It is all agreed." Lord Callan raised an eyebrow. "Magnus, this is unprecedented. He essentially holds us to a standard no Ashbourne spouse has ever been held to. He keeps his secrets, his money, his freedom, and he gains full access to ours. Are you certain?" Magnus looked back at Elowen, his gaze softening in a way no one else in the room had ever seen. "Father, I did not choose him because he was easy. I chose him because he is extraordinary. And extraordinary things require extraordinary terms." He turned back to Elowen, leaning slightly closer, his voice pitched low so only Elowen could hear. "You negotiated like a ruler, Elowen. You demanded things no Omega has ever dared to ask for. And you did it with such grace and composure. I found myself wanting to give you even more than you asked for." Elowen inclined his head, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "I only asked for what was already mine by right of ability. You were simply wise enough to recognize it. When the documents were signed, sealed, and witnessed, the formalities were concluded. The wedding ceremony itself followed shortly after, a grand, lavish affair attended by every noble house in the realm, filled with pageantry, tradition, and celebration. But for Elowen and Magnus, the vows spoken before the altar were merely words. The true binding had happened earlier, in the signing of that unique contract, the one that recognized them not as Alpha and Omega, not as master and spouse, but as two forces coming together to become something far greater. The journey north to Ashbourne lands took several days, traveling through changing landscapes, from the gentle, rolling hills and fertile valleys of Valecrest to the rugged, majestic beauty of the Ashbourne territory. Towering mountains, deep pine forests, fast-flowing rivers, and vast stretches of wild, untamed land. Ashbourne Hall itself stood imposing and magnificent atop a high ridge, a fortress and a palace combined, built of dark stone and timber, strong enough to withstand any siege, beautiful enough to reflect the wealth and taste of its owners. It was a place of power, history, and quiet grandeur. Elowen's arrival was met with all the ceremony due to the new husband and partner of the heir. Servants bowed low, stewards presented keys to every wing of the house, household managers stood ready to answer his every need or whim. They expected him to retreat to the luxurious private apartments set aside for him, to spend his days sewing or reading or receiving visitors, to be the quiet, beautiful ornament to Magnus's power that everyone assumed he was. But Elowen had no intention of being an ornament. From the very first morning, he made his presence felt in ways that confused, intrigued, and eventually awed everyone in the household. He rose early, before most of the staff, and began to explore not just the rooms and corridors, but the systems that kept the estate running. He sat in on meetings with the estate managers, listening quietly, asking questions that seemed simple, but cut straight to the heart of inefficiencies or outdated practices. He studied the ledgers, something usually reserved only for the head of house, and quickly identified where resources were being wasted, where supplies could be sourced more cheaply or of higher quality, where storage methods were leading to unnecessary loss. He reorganized the legal archives, sorting documents not just by date or type, but by strategic value and cross-reference, creating a system that made retrieving information fast and intuitive, something that had taken the previous archivists years to struggle through. He streamlined the distribution of goods across the Ashbourne lands, implementing preservation and transport techniques he had developed years ago, reducing spoilage and cutting costs by nearly a third within the first month. He improved the gardens, introducing new plants, new layouts, new methods of cultivation that increased yield and beauty alike. And he did it all without ever demanding authority, without ever raising his voice, without ever overstepping the bounds of courtesy or position. He simply observed, analyzed, suggested, and improved, quietly, efficiently, perfectly. Magnus watched it all with growing fascination and a feeling he had never expected to experience, profound respect mixed with a deep, possessive pride. He had known Elowen was intelligent. He had known he was capable. But seeing him in action, seeing how he moved through the estate like a force of nature, understanding every detail, fixing every flaw, optimizing every system without seeming to exert any effort at all, it took Magnus's breath away. He began to realize that Elowen was not someone to be protected from the world. He was not someone who needed Magnus's strength to survive or thrive. He was someone who understood the world better than most alphas ever could, and who made everything around him better simply by being there. They spent more and more time together, not as husband and wife in the traditional sense, but as two minds constantly engaging, challenging, and complementing one another. They would walk the extensive grounds of the estate at dusk, moving side by side, discussing trade routes, political tensions, economic trends, or the design of a new warehouse. They would sit late into the night in Magnus's private study, surrounded by maps and ledgers, debating strategies or analyzing reports, their conversation sharp, intellectual, and endlessly stimulating. The physical attraction that had hummed between them since their first meeting grew steadily, deepening from a simple reaction of biology and beauty into something far richer, far more meaningful. Magnus found himself drawn not just to Elowen's appearance, though he still thought him the most breathtaking creature he had ever seen, but to the way he thought, the way he spoke, the quiet confidence he carried himself with, the strength that lay beneath his soft exterior. He found himself wanting to be near him constantly, wanting to hear his voice, wanting to see that spark of intelligence light up his gray eyes. For Elowen, the attraction was equally potent. He had chosen Magnus for his power and his position, yes, but he had not anticipated how much he would come to admire the man himself. His discipline, his integrity, his ambition, and the way he looked at Elowen not as a possession or a prize, but as an equal, a partner, and the most fascinating person he had ever known. Magnus was the only person who didn't try to protect him from the realities of power, but instead invited him deeper into it. He was the only one who didn't want to silence his mind, but wanted nothing more than to hear every thought, every idea, every secret Elowen had. One evening, after a long day spent reviewing the management of Ashbourne's vast timber forests and iron mines, they remained in Magnus's study, the fire burning low, the room warm and quiet. The work was done, the maps were rolled away, the reports were filed. They sat in comfortable armchairs pulled close together, a glass of wine beside each of them, the silence between them easy and familiar. Magnus looked at Elowen, watching the way the firelight caught the silver strands in his hair and softened the sharp intelligence of his features. He had been wanting to say something for weeks, wanting to acknowledge the shift that had happened between them, wanting to put into words what Elowen had become to him. "You know," Magnus said softly, breaking the quiet, his voice low and warm, "when I requested this marriage, I thought I was gaining a brilliant advisor, a strategist, someone who could help me manage what I already had." He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes searching Elowen's face with an intensity that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the man sitting before him. "I didn't realize I was gaining the only person capable of showing me how much more there is to have, how much more there is to be." Elowen turned his head to look at him, a soft, genuine smile touching his lips, one that reached his eyes and made them glow like warm silver in the firelight. "And I thought I was gaining a sword and a shield, a powerful name to protect what I built. I didn't realize I was gaining the only person who actually sees me. All of me." Magnus reached out, his hand moving slowly, deliberately, giving Elowen every chance to retreat, to refuse, to set a boundary as he had done so many times before. But this time, Elowen did not retreat. He did not set a barrier. He leaned in instead, his gray eyes clear and open, waiting. Magnus's fingers brushed lightly against Elowen's cheek, tracing the line of his jaw, soft and reverent, as if touching something infinitely precious. His touch was warm, firm, and entirely respectful, but heavy with the weight of all the desire, admiration, and affection that had been building for months. "You are extraordinary, Elowen," Magnus murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day I spend with you, I find something new to admire, something new to want, something new to love." Elowen covered Magnus's hand with his own, holding it gently against his face, turning his head slightly to press a soft kiss to the palm. "And you are everything I needed, Magnus. Everything I hoped for. Everything I didn't know I could want." There was no rush, no desperation, no crude urgency. What passed between them was slow, deliberate, and deeply felt, built on months of conversation, trust, and the profound understanding that they were equals in every way. Magnus leaned closer, and when his lips finally met Elowen's, it was not a claim or a demand, but a meeting, a joining, a quiet admission of everything that had grown between them. The kiss was soft at first, gentle and questioning, before deepening into something warmer, firmer, filled with the intensity of two powerful people finding peace and belonging in each other. It was a union not just of bodies, but of minds and wills, a confirmation that the contract they had signed was far more than a legal arrangement. It was the beginning of something unbreakable. Magnus's arms wrapped slowly around Elowen's waist, pulling him closer, yet keeping enough space to ensure Elowen always had the freedom to move or pause, honoring the autonomy Elowen had fought so hard to secure. Elowen, in turn, rested his hands lightly on Magnus's broad shoulders, his fingers curling gently into the fabric of the tunic, leaning into the touch with a trust he gave to no one else in the world. When they finally drew apart, breathless and warm, the air around them felt transformed, lighter, richer, filled with a quiet promise. Magnus rested his forehead against Elowen's, his eyes closed for a moment, breathing in the scent of him, lavender, parchment, and that unique, clean sweetness that was purely Elowen. "I thought I knew what power was," Magnus whispered, his voice thick and soft. "I thought it was armies, and gold and lands. But standing here with you, knowing that you are mine, and that I am yours, I realize that this is the only power that truly matters." Elowen smiled, a soft, radiant thing that lit up his entire face, and brushed his thumb gently over Magnus's cheekbone. "Power is only useful when shared, Magnus. And we have only just begun to build ours." They did not rush further into intimacy that night. For Elowen, and for Magnus too, everything meaningful was built on respect and choice, and neither wanted to hurry what they both knew would be the most important connection of their lives. They remained close, sitting side by side on the wide settee before the fire, shoulders touching, hands clasped loosely together, speaking softly long into the night, not of trade or politics or strategy, but of themselves. They spoke of childhood dreams, of fears they had never admitted to anyone, of the things they loved and the things they hoped to achieve. For the first time, they were not the heir of Ashbourne or the mastermind of Valecrest. They were simply two people who had found in each other the one thing the world had never given them, someone who truly understood. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened in ways that blurred every line between professional partnership and personal devotion. They were rarely apart. Where Magnus went, Elowen followed, and vice versa. If Magnus held court with military commanders or noble visitors, Elowen sat quietly at his side, observing, listening, and occasionally offering a comment or question that would shift the entire course of the discussion, leaving everyone in the room astonished at his insight and wisdom. If Elowen spent hours reviewing estate records or corresponding with his far-flung network of contacts, Magnus would be nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes working on his own matters, sometimes simply watching, content just to be in Elowen's presence, protective and attentive without ever being overbearing. The household, which had initially viewed Elowen with curiosity, skepticism, or even pity, quickly came to regard him with awe and deep respect. They saw how Magnus deferred to him, how he valued his opinion above all others, how his demeanor softened and sharpened in equal measure when Elowen was near. They saw the tangible improvements Elowen brought to every aspect of life at Ashbourne, from the efficiency of the kitchens to the yields of the farms to the morale of the staff. They realized, slowly but surely, that the quiet, beautiful Omega was not just the husband of the heir. He was the heart and mind of the entire house. One afternoon, several months after their arrival, they stood together on the highest balcony of Ashbourne Hall, looking out over the vast, sweeping lands that stretched toward the horizon. Forests, rivers, villages, and fields, all under Ashbourne protection and rule. The wind was sharp and sweet with pine, carrying the scent of the wild, free lands they commanded. Magnus stood behind Elowen, his arms wrapped comfortably around his waist, holding him close against his chest, his chin resting lightly on Elowen's shoulder as they gazed out over their domain. "Do you remember?" Magnus asked softly, his voice carried away slightly by the wind. "In your father's study, when you told me that I might have vastly misunderstood exactly who I had agreed to marry." Elowen smiled, leaning back against him, secure and warm. "I remember. I told you I was not a prize to be owned." Magnus chuckled low in his throat, the vibration rumbling through Elowen's back. "And you were right. I came into this thinking I was acquiring a partner, an advisor, a brilliant mind to aid my rise. But what I have acquired is so much more." He turned his head, pressing a kiss to the sensitive skin just below Elowen's ear, slow and tender. "You have changed everything, Elowen. You have changed how I rule. You have changed how I see the world. You have changed me." He turned Elowen gently in his arms so they faced each other, his hands resting firmly but gently on Elowen's hips, his dark eyes searching deep into gray ones filled with equal warmth and strength. "I used to think that to be powerful meant to be untouchable, to stand alone, to let no one see your weaknesses or your heart. But you have shown me that true strength is in connection, in trust, in standing side by side with the only person in the world strong enough to carry half the weight and brilliant enough to help you carry the rest." Elowen reached up, placing his hands flat against Magnus's chest, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat beneath the layers of wool and linen, a rhythm he had come to know as well as his own. "And you have shown me that power does not have to be hidden in shadows to be safe. That it can stand in the light, bold and proud, protected by a strength greater than any secret." Magnus leaned closer, his forehead resting against Elowen's, his voice dropping to a whisper thick with feeling. "We are bound now, Elowen. By contract, by law, by ambition, and by something far deeper than any of those things. You are my equal, my partner, my husband. And I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am worthy of the trust you placed in me when you let me catch you." Elowen laughed softly, the sound bright and happy in the crisp air. "Let you catch me? Magnus, you still believe you were the hunter." He lifted his head, looking straight into Magnus's eyes with that familiar, dazzling mix of intellect and affection. "We are both the hunters now, and we are both the prize. And the whole realm is our game." Magnus's expression shifted, softening into something profound, something that went beyond desire or ambition into pure, unyielding devotion. He lifted one hand to cup Elowen's face, his thumb brushing gently over his cheekbone, tracing the features he knew so well. "Then let the whole realm beware," Magnus murmured, before lowering his lips to meet Elowen's in a kiss that was no longer just about agreement or attraction, but about belonging. It was slow, deep, and tender, a sealing of every promise, every clause, every secret hope they had ever held. It was the kiss of two rulers standing at the beginning of an era, fully aware of the power they held individually, and infinitely more aware of the power they held together. As the sun dipped low behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold, purple, and deep blue, they remained there, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the lands that were theirs to shape. The contract signed months ago lay safe in the archives, a legal masterpiece that had rewritten the rules of marriage and power. But standing there, with the wind in their hair and the quiet strength of each other's presence surrounding them, they knew that the true contract was written in the understanding between them, in the trust they had built, and in the undeniable, unbreakable bond that had turned a strategic alliance into the most powerful union the realm had ever seen. Whatever came next, political struggles, economic expansion, wars or treaties, the building of their dynasty, they would face it together. Elowen would continue to weave his invisible networks, to see what others missed, to plan years ahead while others planned only days. Magnus would continue to wield his strength, his influence, his authority, turning Elowen's visions into reality and protecting what was theirs with every breath in his body. They were the perfect balance, light and shadow, seen and unseen, sword and mind, strength and strategy. And as they turned back toward the warmth and light of the hall, walking hand in hand as equals, it was clear to anyone watching that the world would never be the same again. The jewel of Valecrest had not been locked away in a northern fortress. He had lit a fire within it, and together with the heir of Ashbourne, they were ready to burn bright enough to illuminate the entire realm. Chapter 4. Union of Souls. The days grew shorter, and the nights colder as autumn deepened into winter, wrapping the Ashbourne lands in a blanket of frost and snow. Inside the great stone walls of the hall, however, the atmosphere was warm, bright, and alive with purpose and quiet joy. The formalities of arrival were long behind them. The celebrations had faded into memory. The adjustments to new roles and responsibilities had been made. Now the rhythm of life was established, a rhythm that suited Elowen and Magnus perfectly, one where duty and desire, work and rest, public standing and private intimacy flowed seamlessly into one another. Their private apartments occupied the entire western wing of the main keep, a spacious suite of rooms connected by wide corridors and overlooking the snow-covered forests and mountains beyond. It was a space designed to be both fortress and sanctuary. High ceilings supported by heavy oak beams, walls paneled in dark wood, floors covered in thick, soft rugs woven with the Ashbourne raven and the Valecrest oak intertwined. There was a large receiving room for meetings, a private study twice the size of the one Elowen had left behind, a library filled with rare volumes and maps, and finally, the bedchamber, a vast, comfortable room dominated by a great bed draped in heavy woolen fabrics, positioned near a hearth that was always kept burning. It was here, in the quiet hours of the evening, that the barriers between heir and mastermind, between Alpha and Omega, finally began to dissolve completely. They had taken things slowly, deliberately. Both men understood that true intimacy required more than just proximity or legal bond. It required absolute trust, a vulnerability that neither of them offered lightly. Magnus had never pressured Elowen, never pushed for more than Elowen was willing to give, respecting the boundaries and autonomy that had been written so clearly into their contract and their relationship. He had shown his devotion in 1,000 small ways, ensuring Elowen always had the best light for reading, bringing him rare herbs or books from distant travels, standing firm against anyone who dared to treat Elowen as anything less than his equal. Elowen, in turn, had slowly lowered the defenses he had built up over a lifetime of hiding his true nature. He had learned that with Magnus, he did not need to wear the mask of the quiet, delicate Omega. He could speak his mind, show his strength, reveal his ambitions, and still be cherished. He had discovered that Magnus did not love him in spite of his power and brilliance, but because of them. It was on a night of heavy snowfall, when the wind howled softly outside and the fire crackled merrily within, that the final distance between them vanished. They had spent the evening, as they often did, seated near the hearth, going over reports from the southern trade routes. The work had been finished for an hour or more, but neither had moved away. Instead, they had drifted into quiet conversation, their voices low and easy, speaking of everything and nothing. Elowen sat curled in the deep, cushioned armchair, his legs drawn up beneath him, wrapped in a soft woolen shawl the color of silver. Magnus sat on the floor beside him, leaning back against the chair's frame, one elbow resting lightly against Elowen's knee, a position of relaxed, comfortable familiarity. At some point, the conversation had slowed, then stopped altogether. A silence fell, not empty or awkward, but rich and full, heavy with everything they had not yet said or done. Elowen looked down, watching the play of firelight over Magnus's dark hair and strong profile, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the flames beside them. Magnus turned his head, lifting his gaze to meet Elowen's, and in that look, Elowen saw everything: admiration, respect, longing, and a deep, abiding love that had grown roots deep into both their hearts. Magnus reached up slowly, his hand resting gently against Elowen's thigh, his touch light and questioning, always waiting for permission. "Elowen," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "you have given me so much. You have given me your mind, your counsel, your strength. You have given me a new way to rule, a new way to see the world. But sometimes I still feel there is a part of you I have not yet been allowed to touch. The deepest part." Elowen placed his hand over Magnus's, his fingers lacing through his, holding on tight. He leaned forward, his gray eyes soft and luminous in the firelight. "That part is not hidden from you, Magnus. It is only waiting. Waiting until I was certain. Until I knew that you wanted all of me, exactly as I am. And you know that now?" Magnus asked, shifting to rise smoothly to his feet, kneeling now between Elowen's knees, bringing their faces level. His expression was open, earnest, stripped of all his usual armor of command and authority. "Do you know that there is no part of you, clever or soft, powerful or gentle, hidden or revealed, that I do not want, that I do not cherish, that I do not love with everything I am?" Elowen's breath caught. He had heard words of affection before, spoken by courtiers or suitors who admired his beauty or his lineage. But he had never heard anything like this, a confession that saw him whole, that loved the entirety of his complex, unusual self. "I know," Elowen whispered, his voice trembling slightly. He reached out, his hands coming to rest on Magnus's broad shoulders, sliding slowly up to cup his face, his touch reverent and sure. "I know now. You have shown me, every day in every way. You do not want a jewel to keep in a box. You want the whole world I carry inside me. And you want to give me yours in return." Magnus leaned into the touch, turning his head slightly to press a kiss to the palm of Elowen's hand. "I give you everything. My name, my strength, my life, my heart. It has been yours since the moment I realized who you truly were." There was no rush, no urgency born of simple biology or desire. What moved between them was deeper, slower, built on months of knowing each other's minds and souls. Magnus rose further, drawing Elowen gently up from the chair and into his arms. Elowen went willingly, melting against him, resting his head against Magnus's chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heart, the heartbeat of the man who had become his partner, his protector, and his equal. Magnus held him close, his arms wrapping around Elowen's waist and back, holding him with a firmness that spoke of possession, but a gentleness that spoke of devotion. He began to move them slowly toward the large bed, his steps measured and careful, never breaking the contact between them. Every movement was a question, every touch an offering, ensuring that Elowen led the pace, set the boundaries, and chose every step of the way. When they reached the bed, Magnus paused, looking down into Elowen's face, his dark eyes searching. "We do not have to do this tonight. We do not ever have to do anything you do not want. Whatever you choose, I am yours." Elowen smiled, a soft, radiant expression that lit up his entire face. He reached up, unfastening the clasp of his cloak and letting it fall away, leaving him in his soft tunic of fine silk. He reached for Magnus's hands, bringing them to rest at his waist. "I choose this," Elowen said clearly, his voice steady and sure. "I choose you. And I choose us. Everything else was just preparation. This is the beginning." Magnus's expression softened into something profoundly tender, and relieved. He leaned down, his lips meeting Elowen's in a kiss that was different from any before it. It was deeper, slower, filled with a quiet intensity that spoke of longing fulfilled. It was a kiss that acknowledged their bond, not just as ruler and partner, or Alpha and Omega, but as two people who had found their perfect match in a world full of ordinary things. Magnus's hands moved slowly, reverently, undoing the fastenings of Elowen's tunic, his touch warm against the skin revealed inch by inch. He treated every part of Elowen with awe and care, as if he were indeed holding something infinitely precious, something rare and powerful that he never wanted to harm or break. He admired the slender strength of him, the soft lines, the beauty that was so much more than surface deep. And as he touched him, he spoke soft words of praise, of wonder, of love, telling Elowen exactly what he saw, exactly what he valued, exactly how much he meant. "You are so beautiful," Magnus murmured against the skin of Elowen's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "But it is not this skin or this shape, it is you. It is the mind inside, the spirit that burns so bright, the heart that is so strong and so good. That is what I love. That is what I worship." Elowen, in turn, was no passive recipient. His hands moved over Magnus's body, exploring the broad muscles, the scars from old battles, the solid frame that represented so much power and history. He undid the clasps of Magnus's heavy tunic, revealing the warm skin beneath, tracing lines over his chest and arms with a curiosity and appreciation equal to Magnus's own. He was not shy, not demure, not playing the role of the modest Omega. He was claiming his husband, his partner, his equal, just as surely as Magnus claimed him. "You are strength," Elowen whispered, pressing a kiss over Magnus's heart. "You are protection. You are the solid ground I stand on. And you are the only one who has ever looked at me and seen a king, not a treasure." As they came together, it was a meeting of equals, a union of souls as much as bodies. There was no imbalance, no power play, no attempt to dominate or submit in any way that diminished either of them. Magnus's nature as an alpha and Elowen's as an omega were present, undeniable, adding their own layer of rightness and belonging, but they were not the defining force. What defined this moment was choice, respect, and a profound, overwhelming love. Magnus moved with a careful, deliberate slowness, always attentive to Elowen's comfort, always checking, always asking without words. He gave Elowen time, space, and endless reassurance. He made sure that every touch was wanted, every closeness welcomed, every moment shared fully. It was gentle, tender, and deeply intimate, an act of trust that bound them closer than any vow or legal document ever could. For Elowen, there was no fear, no hesitation, no sense of being owned or used. There was only the feeling of being seen completely, accepted completely, and loved completely. He felt the barriers he had spent a lifetime building finally crumble away, not because they were forced down, but because he no longer needed them. Here, in Magnus's arms, he was safe. Here, he was free. Here, he was everything he was meant to be. The pleasure they found was not just physical, though it was sweet and overwhelming, a harmony of bodies perfectly attuned to one another. It was the pleasure of connection, of belonging, of finally giving everything they had held inside to another person, and finding it treasured and returned 100-fold. It was the joy of knowing that the person beside you knew your darkest secrets, your greatest strengths, your wildest ambitions, and loved you all the more for them. When it was over, they did not pull apart or turn away. Magnus gathered Elowen close, wrapping heavy furs and blankets around them both, holding him tightly against his chest, their legs tangled together, skin warm against skin. Elowen rested his head on Magnus's shoulder, his breathing slow and steady, his hand resting over Magnus's heart, listening to the rhythm that matched his own. The firelight danced softly across the room, casting long shadows against the walls, and outside, the snow fell silently, covering the world in white, as if the whole realm was holding its breath in respect for what had happened here. Magnus pressed a kiss to the top of Elowen's silver hair, his lips lingering there, his arms secure around him. "I thought I knew what it meant to be bound to someone," Magnus said softly, his voice low and content. "I thought it was duty, or alliance, or shared purpose. But this is something else entirely. This is being woven together, so that I no longer know where I end and you begin." Elowen shifted slightly, lifting his head to look up at him, his gray eyes shining bright and clear, filled with a deep, serene happiness that had never been there before. "We wove our destinies together the moment you walked into my father's study," Elowen replied quietly, a soft smile touching his lips. "But tonight we wove our souls. And nothing will ever be able to unravel us now." Magnus smiled back, a warm, open expression that transformed his usually stern face into something breathtakingly gentle. He brushed a strand of hair back from Elowen's forehead, his touch infinitely tender. "No, nothing. Not time, not distance, not enemies, not fate itself. We are one now, Elowen. Mind and body and heart. You are my husband, my equal, my love. And we will face everything together, exactly as we did tonight, side by side, hand in hand, completely ourselves." They settled back into the warmth of the bed, safe, secure, and utterly at peace. Outside, the winter wind blew, and the great machinery of the realm continued to turn. Political games were played, trade routes were guarded, fortunes were made and lost, wars were threatened, and alliances broken. But none of that mattered here, not now. For tonight, the mastermind and the heir were simply two people who had found the one thing all their power and planning could never have guaranteed: true, perfect love. And as they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever empires they built or worlds they changed, this, the quiet, unshakable bond between them, was the greatest achievement of all. The contract had been signed, the alliance sealed, the marriage consummated, and now the real work of ruling the world together could truly begin. Chapter 5. The shadow hand of Ashbourne's spring arrived in the northern lands with a burst of sudden, vivid color, melting the heavy snows into rushing streams and waking the forests from their long winter sleep. The mountains turned from white to green, dotted with wildflowers that carpeted the valleys and hillsides, and the air grew sweet and fresh, carrying the scent of new growth and pine. Inside Ashbourne Hall, the change of seasons brought more than just beauty. It brought the return of movement, travel, and the relentless business of ruling. In the months following that quiet, transformative winter night, the dynamic of power within the house had shifted completely, though to the outside world, everything appeared unchanged. Magnus was still the heir of Ashbourne, commanding, formidable, the face of the house, the man whose name carried weight in every court and council room in the realm. He led the discussions, made the public decrees, commanded the soldiers, and represented Ashbourne interests wherever they were challenged or advanced. But those closest to them, the advisors, the generals, the estate managers, the trusted stewards, had learned a new truth, one that had become unwritten law. To speak with Magnus was to hear the will of Ashbourne. But to speak with Elowen was to understand how that will would be made reality. Elowen had stepped fully into his role as partner and equal, yet he did so with the same quiet mastery that had always defined him. He did not sit on the high dais during audiences. He sat slightly to the side, in a chair that looked like a place of honor but no authority. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, or unless Magnus directly invited his input. But when he did speak, everything stopped. A single comment, a softly spoken question, a gentle suggestion, could alter the entire course of a negotiation, unravel a deception, or open a path forward that no one else had seen. They had fallen into a rhythm that suited them perfectly, a seamless dance of public appearance and private reality. In the privacy of their chambers, or the locked confines of Magnus's study, The hierarchy vanished entirely. There, maps were spread side by side, ledgers were examined together, strategies were debated fiercely and freely, and decisions were made as one. Magnus laid out the goals, expanding trade routes, securing borders, outmaneuvering rival houses, increasing wealth and influence, and Elowen built the structures to achieve them, weaving together resources, information, connections, and timing with the skill of a master weaver creating a tapestry no one else could read. One bright morning, they stood together in the great map room, a vast chamber lined floor to ceiling with charts of every region, river, forest, and settlement in the known world. A large table in the center held a detailed map of the southern and eastern borders, weighted down at the corners with heavy brass instruments. Magnus stood with his hands braced on the edge of the table, his expression serious and sharp, tracing a line along a river that marked the boundary between Ashbourne lands and the territories controlled by House Thuron, their oldest, proudest, and most aggressive rivals. Thuron has begun fortifying the river crossings, Magnus said, his voice low and steady. They have increased patrols along the banks. Their trade ships have been turning our vessels away, claiming disputes over docking rights that have been settled for generations. They are testing us, preparing for something. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting Elowen's. They believe we are distracted. They believe that with the wedding and the winter season, we have grown soft, slow, inattentive. They think because I brought a husband into this house, an Omega, a delicate thing from the south, that Ashbourne has lost its edge, that I am too occupied with domestic matters to guard our power. A faint, knowing smile touched Elowen's lips as he leaned forward slightly, his gaze scanning the map, seeing not just lines and colors, but the flow of goods, the movement of people, the hidden weaknesses and strengths. He wore a tunic of deep green silk, embroidered with silver thread at the cuffs and collar, the colors of Ashbourne now blended with the elegance of Valecrest. His hair was tied back simply, exposing the sharp, intelligent lines of his face, and his hands, resting lightly on the table's edge, were steady and graceful. They think you have been weakened, Elowen agreed softly, his voice clear and calm. They think you have taken on a burden, rather than gaining a strength. It is a common mistake, and one we have allowed them to make. He looked up, his gray eyes glinting with quiet amusement and sharp intellect. How fortunate for us that they underestimate what you brought into this house. How fortunate that they see only the surface, just as everyone always does. He reached out, his slender finger touching a point on the map far to the east, deep within Thuron territory, far from the border disputes. Thuron's wealth comes almost entirely from their grain fields and their textile workshops, Elowen said, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. But their fields depend on irrigation channels that were built nearly a century ago. Channels that are aging, silting up, and require constant maintenance and skilled management. Things Thuron lords have long considered beneath their dignity to oversee personally. He moved his finger slightly, tracing the path of a smaller tributary that fed into the main river system. And their workshops rely almost entirely on imported dyes and specialized weaving materials that travel along roads that pass through lands owned by minor lords, men who owe their loyalty, their wealth, and indeed, their very survival, to certain silent partnerships and supply networks. Magnus watched him, his expression shifting from focus to deep admiration, the familiar thrill of anticipation rising in his chest whenever he watched Elowen work. He knew exactly what Elowen was saying, exactly where this was leading. You can affect the water flow, Magnus stated, quietly, gradually. Reduce their yields before they even realize there is a problem. Elowen nodded. And I can influence the supply lines, delays, shortages, sudden shifts in market price or availability. Within 3 months, their grain reserves will be lower than they dare admit, their production will slow, their profits will drop, and their people will begin to grumble about high costs and poor quality. They will have to spend vast sums to fix things, sums they were planning to use to build new fortifications and warships. He lifted his eyes, looking straight at Magnus, his smile widening into something brilliant and formidable. And while they are scrambling to save their economy and keep their people from turning against them, while they are distracted and weakened, we simply maintain our position at the border. We do nothing aggressive. We do nothing they can protest or fight against. We stand strong, quiet, and immovable. And by the time they realize that their troubles are not accidents, it will be too late for them to do anything but apologize and beg for trade agreements on our terms. Magnus let out a low, rich laugh of pure delight and pride. He reached out, capturing Elowen's hand in his own, lifting it to his lips to press a kiss to his knuckles, his eyes never leaving Elowen's face. "Perfect," Magnus murmured. "Absolute perfection. While they prepare for war, you prepare their defeat without drawing a single sword or spilling a single drop of blood." He shook his head, marveling again, as he did every day, at the incredible mind he had been wise enough to claim as his own. "They think I am the dangerous one. They think Ashbourne's strength lies in our iron and our soldiers. They have no idea that the true danger sits quietly at my side, weaving their ruin out of things they do not even realize exist." Elowen leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a soft, confident whisper, filled with the power of the secrets he held. "Let them think what they want, my love. Let them think you are the sword. You are the sword, sharp, strong, feared, and mighty. But I am the hand that guides it. And as long as we are together, nothing stands a chance against us." That very afternoon, messengers left Ashbourne Hall, riding fast and hard in different directions. They did not carry letters bearing the Ashbourne seal. They did not carry orders from the heir. They carried small encoded notes, written in Elowen's unique cipher, delivered to men and women scattered across the realm. People who owed their livelihoods, their fortunes, or their lives to the silent, unseen network that Elowen had built over years. To the outside world, these were merchants, farmers, engineers, scribes, healers, ordinary folk. But to Elowen, they were the fingers of his hand, the eyes and ears of his mind, the agents of his will. The work began immediately, silent and invisible. Months passed, and exactly as Elowen had predicted, the situation with House Thuron shifted dramatically. Reports drifted in, strange reports, confusing reports, from travelers and traders. Grain prices in Thuron lands had risen sharply, yet the quality had fallen. Workshops were closing or reducing hours due to lack of materials. There were murmurs of discontent in the cities, quiet complaints about mismanagement and rising taxes needed to fund defense preparations that no one could see the need for. Thuron envoys arrived at Ashbourne Hall, tense and confused, seeking trade agreements, seeking loans, seeking reassurance, never realizing that the very man they spoke to was the one who had orchestrated their difficulties, and the quiet Omega sitting nearby was the architect of their current desperation. While Magnus handled the public side, gracious, powerful, imposing, offering terms that were generous only if one ignored how completely they favored Ashbourne, Elowen sat in the background, observing, listening, occasionally asking a soft question that made the envoys stumble or reveal more than they intended. And when the envoys left, having signed agreements that effectively put Thuron economic power under Ashbourne control, Magnus and Elowen would retreat to their private chambers, triumphant and amused, their bond strengthened further by every victory they shared. But it was not just rival houses that felt the influence of Elowen's hand. Slowly, carefully, he began to reshape Ashbourne itself, turning it from merely the strongest house in the realm into something far greater, a center of industry, innovation, and prosperity that touched the lives of everyone within its sphere of influence. He introduced new farming techniques that doubled crop yields without exhausting the soil. He established schools for the children of farmers and laborers, ensuring a steady supply of skilled workers and loyal subjects. He improved roads, bridges, and storage facilities, making trade faster, safer, and cheaper. He organized the distribution of medicine and healing services, ensuring that sickness and plague, which had once devastated whole regions, were now rare and quickly contained. He did not do these things out of pure kindness, though he possessed a generous heart. He did them because he understood that true power was not about controlling people through fear or force. It was about making them dependent on you for their well-being, their prosperity, and their safety. When people were fed, healthy and wealthy, they were loyal. When a region prospered under your rule became unassailable. And Magnus supported every step, every change, every innovation with absolute, unshakable faith. He used his authority, his soldiers, and his resources to clear the way, to enforce new laws, to protect new developments, and to silence any who dared to object or stand in the way. Where Elowen led with intelligence and foresight, Magnus led with strength and command. Together, they moved mountains. One evening, late in the season, they walked together along the battlements of Ashbourne Hall, high above the surrounding lands. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, red, and purple, casting long shadows across the forests and fields below. The air was warm and filled with the sounds of life, birds singing, cattle lowing in the distant pastures, the faint hum of activity from the villages clustered at the foot of the hill. Magnus walked with his arms slung comfortably around Elowen's shoulders, holding him close, his gaze sweeping over the vast, thriving lands spread out before them. There was pride in his expression, deep and genuine, but it was not the pride of ownership or conquest. It was the pride of partnership. "Do you remember," Magnus said softly, his voice carried gently on the breeze, "when you told me in your father's study that you were not a prize to be owned? That I had vastly misunderstood who I was marrying?" Elowen smiled, leaning his head against Magnus's shoulder as they walked slowly along the stone wall. "I remember. I believe I told you that you were my sword and my shield." Magnus chuckled low in his throat, the sound rumbling through his chest. "And I told you that I was the hunter and you were the catch. How wrong I was." He stopped walking, turning Elowen gently to face him, his hands resting firmly but tenderly on Elowen's waist. He looked down at him, his dark eyes filled with a love and respect that had only grown deeper and stronger with every day that passed. "I thought I was gaining an ally. A brilliant mind. A beautiful husband. But what you have done, what you are doing, it goes far beyond anything I ever imagined possible." He gestured broadly to the lands stretching out below them, rich, fertile, peaceful, and prosperous. "Ashbourne was powerful before you came. We were feared. We were wealthy. We were respected. But we were stagnant. We were doing things the way they had always been done, fighting battles that had been fought for 100 years, seeing only what was right in front of our noses." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a soft, intense murmur. "You have changed everything, Elowen. You have turned strength into greatness. You have turned power into prosperity. You have turned this house into something that will never fall, never fade, never be challenged again, because you have built it on something far stronger than iron or soldiers. You have built it on necessity, on value, on the fact that every single person living within our borders, and many outside them, are better off because we rule them." Elowen reached up, placing his hands flat against Magnus's chest, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat beneath his palm, the heartbeat of the man who had given him everything he needed to make his visions reality. "We built it together, Magnus," Elowen said quietly, his tone firm and sure. "Every plan I make, every idea I have, every change I bring, none of it would matter. None of it would survive if you were not there to stand behind it, to defend it, to enforce it, to lend it your strength and your name." He smiled, bright and brilliant, his gray eyes shining with the light of his boundless mind. I am the shadow hand, yes. I work where no one sees. I control what no one understands. But you are the heart of it all. Without you, I am just a man with ideas. With you, I am the ruler of the world. Magnus's expression softened, filled with such deep, overwhelming love that it almost took his breath away. He drew Elowen closer, wrapping his arms tightly around him, holding him as if he were the most precious thing in existence, which, to Magnus, he was. Then let us rule it together, Magnus whispered, lowering his head to rest his forehead against Elowen's. Let us build it higher, further, stronger. Let us make this realm into something no one has ever dreamed of. And let the whole world learn the truth, whether they realize it or not, that behind the name Ashbourne, behind the power and the glory, stands you. The jewel who is no ornament. The Omega who holds the world in his hands. He kissed him then, deep and tender, a seal on their shared destiny, a celebration of their perfect union. Around them, the sun dipped below the mountains, and the lights began to twinkle on in the villages and farms below, a sea of small fires marking the lives and homes of thousands of people whose prosperity and safety depended entirely on the two men standing high above them. They were more than husband and wife, more than Alpha and Omega, more than lord and partner. They were the visible and the invisible, the strength and the mind, the face and the hand. And as they turned back toward the hall, hand in hand, moving together in perfect step, it was clear to anyone watching, if anyone had been watching, that the true power of Ashbourne was not just in the heir who led armies or sat in council. It was in the quiet, brilliant man walking beside him, the one who saw everything, knew everything, and guided the fate of the realm with a gentle, unyielding hand from the shadows. The game had changed. The world had changed. And it would never be the same again. Chapter 6. The crown in shadow years had passed since Elowen first crossed the threshold of Ashbourne Hall, and the realm had transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a patchwork of competing houses, fragile alliances, and constant, low-level conflict had settled into a single, stable order, centered firmly around Ashbourne. Magnus had succeeded his father as Duke, his authority absolute, his name synonymous with strength, justice, and prosperity. To the people, he was the ruler they looked up to, the strong arm that protected them, the voice that spoke for them, the figurehead of a golden age. But those who looked closer, who understood the true mechanics of power, knew the deeper truth. Ashbourne did not just have a ruler, it had a visionary. And that visionary walked quietly at Magnus's side, rarely raising his voice, never seeking applause, yet touching every part of the realm's life with his intelligence and care. Elowen had changed too, though not in the way most expected. He had not faded into the background, or become merely the consort to a powerful duke. Instead, he had grown into his power, wearing it as naturally and effortlessly as he wore the fine fabrics woven from Ashbourne's own looms. The soft, delicate beauty of his youth had ripened into something striking and regal. His silver-streaked hair was now a mark of distinction. His gray eyes held a depth of knowledge and experience that could unnerve the boldest ambassador or calm the angriest crowd. He was still quiet, still composed, still observant, but now that quietness carried weight. When Elowen entered a room, conversation did not stop out of courtesy. It stopped out of respect and a little bit of awe. They stood now in the great throne room of Ashbourne Hall, a chamber that had been expanded and redecorated under Elowen's direction, blending the ancient, rugged strength of the north with the refined elegance of the south. At the far end, upon a high dais, sat Magnus upon the great oak throne, carved with ravens and swords, wearing the heavy robes of his office, his expression commanding and steady. To his left, on a chair that matched the throne in every detail but height, an intentional, subtle choice that spoke volumes without saying a word, sat Elowen. He wore robes of deep silver and green, the colors of both his heritage and his marriage, and in his hand he held no sword or scepter, but a small, polished orb of clear crystal, a symbol of clarity and foresight that had become his personal emblem. Before them, the high council of the realm had gathered. Lords and ladies of great houses, military commanders, masters of trade, and advisors. They had come to discuss a matter of the utmost gravity, one that had been simmering on the edges of the realm for years, and now threatened to boil over. King Thuron, the younger brother of the man Elowen had outmaneuvered years ago, had spent the last decade rebuilding his house's fortunes, or so he believed. He had formed alliances with distant kingdoms, hired mercenary companies, and stockpiled weapons and supplies. He spoke openly of reclaiming what he called stolen lands and dignity, and his envoys had been sent across the realm, spreading tales of Ashbourne tyranny and calling for a grand coalition to bring down the northern upstarts. Reports of troop movements, naval preparations, and aggressive posturing had been arriving at Ashbourne for months. The council was divided. The military leaders, proud and confident, urged immediate action, gather the army, strike first, crush Thuron before he could unite his allies. The older, more cautious lords urged diplomacy, negotiation, offering concessions to avoid bloodshed. The atmosphere in the room was tense, voices raised in argument, different plans shouted over one another, uncertainty thick in the air. Magnus sat listening, his face impassive, his hand resting thoughtfully on the arm of the throne. He was strong enough to lead them to war, clever enough to win it, but he waited. He always waited now, until he heard the voice that mattered most. Slowly, calmly, Elowen stood. The noise in the room died instantly. Every eye turned to him. He did not raise his hand for silence. He did not need to. His mere presence commanded it. He walked forward a few steps, into the open space before the dais, his movements graceful and unhurried. He looked out over the assembled nobles, his gaze meeting each of theirs in turn, seeing their fears, their ambitions, their ignorance, and their strengths. War seems the simplest answer, does it not? Elowen began, his voice soft but carrying clearly to every corner of the vast room, melodic and steady. When someone threatens you, you strike back. When they build armies, you build bigger ones. When they speak of conquest, you speak of defense. It is the way power has always worked, or so we are told. He paused, letting his words sink in, his expression thoughtful, almost gentle. But think for a moment. What does war cost us? Gold, yes. Lives, certainly. But more than that, it costs us time. It costs us the progress we have made. It risks the prosperity that now feeds every family in this realm, that fills our markets, that makes our lands the envy of the world. And what does it give us, even if we win? A pile of ruins. A population made bitter by defeat. A cycle of hatred that will take another generation to heal, if ever. He turned slightly, his gaze settling on the military commanders, men he respected and worked closely with. General, your soldiers are the finest in the world. I have seen them train, I have seen them fight, I have seen them defend our borders with courage unmatched. I do not doubt for a moment that if Duke Magnus gave the order, you could march south, meet Thuron in the field, and break his armies completely within a month. The general nodded, proud and confident. We could, my lord, easily. Elowen smiled faintly. I know. And that is exactly why we will not do it. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Heads turned, whispers started, eyebrows raised. Magnus watched from the throne, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. He knew exactly where Elowen was going. He had seen the plans, the maps, the reports that no one else in this room had even read. Elowen turned back to the assembly, his gray eyes sharp and bright. King Thuron believes he is ready for war. He believes his alliances are strong, his supplies secure, his people loyal. He believes that by attacking Ashbourne, he can gain wealth, land, and prestige. But King Thuron is operating on information that is incomplete, outdated, and fundamentally wrong. He began to walk slowly along the line of lords and commanders, speaking as he moved, weaving his words into a picture that unfolded before their minds. 3 years ago, when he first began to speak of rebellion, his chief advisor was a man named Corvin. A man who owed a great debt to certain, quiet partners, and who found it in his heart to share Thuron's long-term plans with us. 2 years ago, when he began stockpiling grain, the merchants who sold to him were under contract to us, and ensured that while his warehouses look full on paper, a third of what he paid for never actually arrived. Last year, when he negotiated his alliances with the coastal kingdoms, we were already there, renewing old trade agreements, offering them better prices, better protection, better everything than Thuron ever could. They signed his treaties, yes, but they signed ours first. And our terms include a very simple clause: neutrality in any conflict that threatens Ashbourne. The silence in the room was now absolute. Shock, awe, and dawning realization were written on every face. They had thought Ashbourne's strength was in its soldiers and its iron minds. They had thought Magnus's rule was built on command and force. They had no idea that for years, Elowen had been dismantling Thuron's ability to fight before the first sword was ever forged. Elowen stopped, turning back to face them all, his expression calm and utterly certain. Thuron thinks he has allies. He has none. He thinks he has supplies. He does not. He thinks his people love him and will die for his pride. In truth, they are tired of high taxes, tired of war preparations, tired of seeing their wealth spent on weapons while their roads crumble and their harvests rot. He is marching toward a cliff edge, convinced he is marching to victory. He looked up at Magnus, their eyes meeting across the room, a silent conversation passing between them, one of perfect understanding, love, and shared purpose. We will not meet him with steel. We will meet him with reality. When he marches, his allies will send apologies and excuses and stay home. When his army moves, they will find the roads we built are excellent, but the ones leading into his lands are suddenly in desperate need of repair. His supplies will fail to arrive. His gold will run out because the banks we control have quietly restricted his credit. His own people will begin to protest, asking why they suffer for a war they do not want and cannot win. Elowen's voice dropped lower, becoming darker, sharper, the voice of the master strategist revealing the final move. And when he stands alone, abandoned, bankrupt, and facing rebellion from within his own cities, we do not crush him. We send envoys. We send food. We send aid. We offer him peace, protection, and a place within our council, on our terms, of course. We turn an enemy into a vassal, a threat into a supporter, and a war that would have cost thousands of lives into a demonstration of power so complete, so absolute, that no one in this realm will ever dare to challenge Ashbourne again. He finished speaking and stepped back, returning to his chair beside the throne. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the general bowed his head, a look of profound respect on his face. "You are right, my lord. As always. Victory without bloodshed, that is the greatest victory of all." Magnus stood then, rising tall and imposing, his voice ringing out with the authority of a ruler confirming the will of the realm. "Heir is decided. We follow this plan. Every detail, every step, exactly as Lord Elowen has outlined. You have your orders." As the council dispersed, moving out into the corridors, still buzzing with the revelation of how deep and how far Ashbourne's influence truly reached, Magnus stepped down from the dais and went immediately to Elowen's side. He took Elowen's hand in his own, lifting it to his lips, his dark eyes shining with pride and love. "Magnificent," Magnus murmured, only for Elowen to hear. "I knew you had been working on this. I knew you had your fingers in many places. But to hear it laid out, to see how completely you have bound them all, it is breathtaking. He looked around the emptying throne room, then back at his husband. They used to whisper that I was too soft, that I let you rule me, that an Omega had no place in matters of state. I wonder what they think now. Elowen smiled, a soft, amused sound, leaning into Magnus's side as they began to walk toward the private apartments. They think we are invincible. And they are right. But the work was never truly done. Even as the plan against Thuron unfolded exactly as predicted, each piece falling into place like clockwork, every crisis appearing natural, every failure looking like bad luck, Elowen was already looking further ahead, beyond the borders of the realm, beyond the current threats, toward a future that stretched for centuries. That evening, they sat together in the privacy of their study, surrounded by maps and ledgers, the fire burning low, a comfortable silence between them. Magnus was reviewing reports from the borderlands, while Elowen was sketching out plans for a new system of canals that would connect the major river systems of the realm, making transport and irrigation easier and cheaper for generations to come. Magnus put down his quill, watching Elowen work, admiring the focus, the intelligence, the sheer creative power that radiated from him. "Do you ever rest?" Magnus asked softly, a smile in his voice. "Do you ever look at what we have built, at the peace we have secured, at the prosperity we have given to so many, and think, this is enough?" Elowen paused, looking up from his drawings, his gray eyes soft and warm in the firelight. He set his pencil aside and leaned back in his chair, turning fully toward Magnus. "Enough," Elowen repeated gently. "My love, when you hold the world in your hands, you do not stop holding it. You do not stop caring for it, shaping it, making it better. Because if you let go, even for a moment, it falls." He reached out, taking Magnus's hand, lacing their fingers together. "But it is not just duty, Magnus. It is joy. I love this. I love seeing what can be done. I love knowing that long after we are gone, people will live better, safer, happier lives because we were here, because we thought of them, because we planned for them." He squeezed Magnus's hand, his expression turning tender. "And besides, how could I rest when there is still so much we can do together? We have unified the realm. We have secured the peace. We have made Ashbourne the center of everything. But there are lands beyond the seas. There are technologies we have only just begun to explore. There is knowledge waiting to be found, shared, used." Magnus laughed softly, shaking his head in wonder. "And you have plans for all of it, I am sure." "Of course," Elowen replied with a playful glint in his eye. "I always have plans. But," he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a warm, intimate murmur, "tonight, the plans can wait. Tonight, I would rather focus entirely on you." Magnus's expression softened instantly, the weight of the Duke falling away to reveal only the husband, the lover, the man who was utterly and completely captivated. He stood and moved around the desk, pulling Elowen up into his arms, holding him close, breathing in the familiar scent that was home to him. "Then let the world wait," Magnus whispered, burying his face in Elowen's neck, his arms wrapping tight around him. "Let the kings plot, let the merchants trade, let the armies march or stand still. None of it matters half as much as this, as you, as us." Elowen rested his head against Magnus's chest, listening to the heartbeat that had guided him, protected him, and loved him for all these years. He thought of the boy he had been, back in Valecrest, hiding his brilliance, planning his escape, dreaming of a place where he could be everything he was meant to be. He thought of the day Magnus walked into his father's hall, the moment their eyes met, the realization that his life was about to change forever. He thought of the contract they had signed, rewriting the rules of marriage and power. He thought of the winter nights, the quiet intimacy, the union of souls that had bound them beyond anything written on paper. He thought of the years of work, of victory, of building, of shaping a realm in their image. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he had made the right choice. Not just the smart choice or the strategic choice, but the choice of his heart. "You once asked me," Elowen said softly, his voice muffled against Magnus's tunic, "if I had let you catch me. Do you remember?" Magnus chuckled, the vibration rumbling through his chest. "I remember. And I still wonder." Elowen pulled back slightly to look up at him, his face glowing with love and happiness, his eyes bright with the wisdom of a lifetime of power and partnership. "I did let you catch me," Elowen said clearly, honestly. "Because I knew then, as I know now, that you were the only hand strong enough to hold the world with me. The only heart big enough to share it. The only soul equal to mine." He reached up, cupping Magnus's face in his hands, his touch infinitely tender. "We are the crown, Magnus. You wear it openly, for all to see. But I carry it in the shadows, where it is safe, where it is strong, where it guides everything we touch. And as long as we stand together, the world will never be in better hands." Magnus lowered his head, his lips meeting Elowen's in a kiss that held all the history, all the love, all the triumph, and all the promise of their extraordinary life together. It was a kiss that acknowledged that while one man sat on the throne, the true power lay in the perfect, unbreakable bond between them. Outside, the great machinery of the realm turned, peaceful and prosperous, guided by the invisible hand that everyone now respected and no one dared to challenge. Inside, wrapped in warmth and love, the two men who had changed everything held each other close, knowing that their work was never done, their love never ending, and their legacy already written into the very soul of the world. They were the heir and the mastermind, the sword in the hand, the face and the shadow. And together, they were unstoppable,